Rhaegar Targaryen stood beneath the ancient weirwood in the God's Wood of Harrenhal, the fading sunlight dancing across the pale bark. A hush fell over the onlookers, Northmen, Crownlanders, lords from the Vale, the Reach, and the Stormlands, all gathered in cautious witness to the union no one had quite anticipated. In the shifting glow, Lyanna Stark faced him with her chin held high, dark hair falling in waves around her face, her gray eyes reflecting both resolve and an undercurrent of awe. For a brief moment, Rhaegar's violet gaze flicked over to where the solemn face of Lord Rhaegar Stark waited, and he saw something like sorrow mixed with fierce pride. Brandon Stark, her eldest brother, was not here to see this. The memory of that heated confrontation in King's Landing still hovered in Rhaegar's mind, but every step that had led to this moment was steeped in the bittersweet acceptance that they had chosen a path that would reshape the Seven Kingdoms. The world seemed to hold its breath. The thick curtain of quiet was broken only by the rustle of leaves, the occasional snap of a twig, and the soft murmuring of distant conversations. Standing beside the weirwood, the High Septon looked both regal and uneasy. He must have been wondering if he was about to be party to an act that would echo through history for better or worse. Rhaegar wore armor beneath a fine black cloak trimmed with red, his silver-gold hair draping across his shoulders like liquid starlight. Lyanna, clad in a gown of ice-blue silk, looked every inch the wolf of the north, regal yet fierce. There was no subtlety in how her hands trembled when she took his, but behind that tremor, her spirit shone. Word had spread through the Harrenhal tourney that Prince Rhaegar had crowned Lyanna Stark as the Queen of Love and Beauty. The realm was already rife with rumors about what that gesture meant. Rumors that had provoked wrath from Robert Baratheon, confusion among the lords, and curiosity among all corners of Westeros. But no one, not even the Targaryen king on the Iron Throne, had expected this. No one had expected that Rhaegar and Lyanna would stand here, in a God's Wood, in front of the Seven, in front of the old gods as well, making a vow that defied centuries of tradition. There were so many secrets swirling around this union, so much precariousness that one wrong move could set the entire kingdom ablaze. Yet Rhaegar remained steady. His hands felt warm over Lyanna's cool fingers as he began to speak the words. His voice was soft but carried across the clearing with the clarity of a bell. He had practiced these words in private moments, testing their sound, their weight, their courage. Never in his life had he been surer of anything. "I stand before gods old and new to pledge my life, my heart, and my sword to Lyanna Stark," he said, letting his voice rise. "In union we join our houses and tie our destinies as one. By blood and by honor, I swear to protect and cherish her, for as long as we both shall live." Lyanna's heart pounded so loud that it roared in her ears. She could feel the eyes of countless nobles and knights on her, but she met Rhaegar's gaze unwaveringly. They had spoken of this moment while crossing secret corridors beneath Harrenhal, in stolen moments of whispered conversation behind locked doors. And yet the reality of it took her breath away. She inhaled, tasting the crisp evening air, and spoke in a voice that never faltered. "I, Lyanna Stark, swear by my honor and name, before gods old and new, that I bind myself to Rhaegar Targaryen. My loyalty is his, my devotion, my heart. I will stand beside him in peace or in peril, from this day until my last day." A ripple of shock and unease passed through the crowd. Lyanna could see her father at the edge of her vision, his expression drawn with worry and something else, perhaps acceptance. He had reluctantly agreed to this marriage once Rhaegar had pleaded his case, not only to House Stark but to any lord who would listen. The Targaryen prince had said it was for the greater good of the realm, a path that might usher in an era of true unity, healing old wounds between North and South, bridging the gulf of distrust between Stark and Targaryen. But everyone knew there were other forces at play. Robert Baratheon's claim to Lyanna's hand, the looming illness that plagued King Aerys II, the tension in the air that stank of rebellion and uncertainty. Still, the vows were spoken now, irrevocable. When the High Septon pronounced them joined, a smattering of applause and hushed exclamations rippled outward. Rhaegar stepped forward, lifted Lyanna's hand to his lips, and pressed a kiss upon her knuckles. This simple act seemed to be the last stroke of some clandestine brush that had been painting the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Many would argue that moment was either the salvation of Westeros or its doom. But on that day, in that Godswood, they were just two young lovers defying the tides of fate. They retired to the great hall of Harrenhal for a feast to mark the wedding. The entire realm felt the strangeness of it, for who would have expected Prince Rhaegar to marry so soon, and especially not Elia Martell, who sat quietly beside her children across the hall, her face a blank mask of stoicism. Elia had known of Rhaegar's beliefs in prophecy, his sense of destiny. Their relationship had always been courteous, yet distant in certain ways. No official word had come regarding an annulment or recognition of polygamous union, but those who paid attention saw the heartbreak in Elia's eyes. Even so, no open condemnation spilled from Dorne's representatives that night. It was as if the entire realm was wrestling with shock and confusion, none wanting to be the first to draw a blade or an accusation in so public a setting. Though the mood in the hall was uneasy, there were pockets of conversation that crackled with excitement. Some Northmen, hearts swelling with pride, toasted to the union that might bring them new influence in the capital. Crownlander lords wondered whether it was wise to question the prince in such a direct manner, and many turned their attention to the future. If Rhaegar should ascend the Iron Throne, what place would the Starks hold in the new order? Would this union truly bring an end to the resentments that festered between regions? Rhaegar and Lyanna circulated the hall. He tried his best to offer kind words to each lord and lady, forging alliances, smoothing tensions, speaking with the quiet earnestness that made him so beloved. He held Lyanna's arm through it all, guiding her gently from one conversation to another. She, for her part, listened keenly, picking out the discontent among certain Stormlords who were loyal to Robert Baratheon, as well as the cautious neutrality of the Tullis. She recognized how some lords, particularly those from the Reach, admired Rhaegar but worried about King Aerys's reaction. And looming over it all was the question of Robert's heartbreak and anger. Later that night, when the feast had dwindled and the guests began retiring, Rhaegar led Lyanna to a private solar. Candlelight illuminated the stone walls, and Lyanna could not help but notice the traces of sorrow etched into Rhaegar's features. He paced the room, slender fingers playing over the strings of his silver harp that leaned against a chair. She quietly asked him what troubled him, though she suspected the answer. He admitted, voice subdued, that his father was furious. Rhaegar had received a raven from King's Landing that very evening. Aerys's letter warned him that any talk of a wedding or new alliance would be deemed treasonous if it challenged the king's authority. But the marriage was already done, sanctified by gods and sealed by vows. Lyanna placed her hand on his shoulder, and he stopped pacing to gaze at her with resolute determination. They knew this moment would come. They were ready to face whatever storms threatened on the horizon. Yet outside the solar windows, the last sliver of moonlight glinted off Harrenhal's accursed towers, and they both felt the weight of what had been set into motion. They stole a moment for themselves. Rhaegar put aside the harp, drew Lyanna close, and let her head rest on his chest. The tension in his posture slowly melted away, and for a heartbeat or two, they just breathed together, letting the hush of midnight cloak their uncertainty in fragile hope. The next day, lords began to depart. Some carried news back to their own domains. Others traveled in cautious clusters, gossiping in hushed tones that Robert Baratheon would never stand for this betrayal. Eddard Stark, taciturn and grave, approached Lyanna and placed a hand on her cheek before taking leave with their father. The bond between brother and sister was strong, but Ned's face was marred by a deep unease, fear that the world they had always known was changing too rapidly. Lyanna tried to be reassuring, reminding him that the North would remain strong, that the Starks endured. But Ned had parted with a grim nod, suspecting that the War of the Nine-Penny Kings, the long memory of hostilities, and the Targaryen madness might swirl together into something no one could contain. Rhaegar and Lyanna lingered at Harrenhal for some time, discussing alliances with the Lord Went, who still reeled from hosting the infamous tourney that had birthed so many rumors. The plan was to travel to Dragonstone, Rhaegar's favored seat, where they could dwell for a time away from the volatile atmosphere of King's Landing. In those days of quiet travel, riding across muddy roads and sweeping hills, Lyanna felt a sense of liberation. She had spent her life bound by southern traditions that felt foreign to her, and she relished traveling at Rhaegar's side as an equal, forging her own path in a realm that had often discounted northern women's voices. Along the journey, they stopped at a small sept perched on a hillside overlooking a forest. The septon there recognized Rhaegar immediately and grew anxious, kneeling before the prince. But Rhaegar quickly ushered him to rise, speaking to him with a gentle courtesy that put the man at ease. As they continued on, word preceded them to each holdfast an inn, and villagers lined the roads to catch a glimpse of the royal couple. Some raised cheers. Rhaegar had always been admired by many small folk, and news of his marriage to a Stark, rumored to be as spirited as she was comely, sparked curiosity. Yet, in certain corners, there was an undercurrent of unease. Targaryen, Stark, fire and ice. Some whispered that even the very land could not hold such opposing forces in balance forever. Dragonstone greeted them with its forbidding silhouette, a fortress carved from ancient volcanic rock. Lyanna stared in awe at the gargoyles perched like silent sentinels atop the castle's battlements. The sea wind whipped at her hair, carrying the salt tang across her senses. In the great hall, tapestries depicting Targaryen conquests lined the walls, dragons woven in crimson and black. Rhaegar watched her as she took in these ancient relics of his lineage. She looked back at him, unafraid. A hush hung over the halls as they settled in. Servants hurried to prepare chambers for the newly arrived princess. Yet it did not feel entirely like a homecoming. Letters continued to arrive in droves, each carrying new tidings from King's Landing or from far-flung corners of the realm. Some lords expressed support, others confusion, and still others spoke outright of the potential for conflict. Rhaegar read them one by one, while Lyanna tried to glean what each message might mean for their future. One evening, a raven arrived from the Red Keep. The news was dire. Robert Baratheon refused to relinquish his betrothal claim. He swore that Lyanna had been stolen from him, that she had been bewitched or forced into the marriage. Worse, King Aerys had begun ranting about betrayal and the possibility that Rhaegar conspired to dethrone him. The shadow of madness that clung to Aerys seemed to thicken like a gathering storm. Rhaegar and Lyanna exchanged grim looks. This was the outcome they had feared. "I must go to my father," Rhaegar murmured, gazing out a window overlooking the surging sea. "I cannot stand idly by while he accuses me of treason. I must speak with him face to face. Perhaps I can convince him of the wisdom in forging an alliance with House Stark, bridging the North and the Targaryen line, or at least quell his worst suspicions." Lyanna, still wearing her traveling leathers, drew closer to him. "We knew this would come, Rhaegar. I'll stand with you, no matter what it takes." Before departing, Rhaegar wrote messages to the lords he trusted most, beckoning them to come to King's Landing or remain on standby, prepared to ensure that any rash move by Aerys did not lead to open war. He promised swift resolution, but the tension knotted in his stomach betrayed his own doubts. Lyanna watched him from across the table, noticing the tightness in his jaw, the flicker of worry in his eyes. She placed a hand on his, and though no words were spoken, he seemed to take heart from her touch. They set sail to King's Landing with a small retinue. The capital loomed large under the scorching sun, a city bristling with life, its crowded streets echoing with haggling cries and gossip. Word had spread of their arrival, and a heavy, restless hush spread among the people. Gold cloaks lined the streets, watchful, tense. Some in the crowd craned to catch a glimpse of the prince and his new Stark bride, while others averted their eyes, as though fearing they might draw the ire of the royal family simply by looking. When they reached the Red Keep, the thick doors groaned open. Silent corridors led them to the throne room, where King Aerys sat perched on the iron throne like a vulture. His unkempt silver hair spilled over thin shoulders, and his eyes burned with an unsettling brightness. The air stank of wildfire residue. Courtiers looked on in apprehension, as though any sudden movement might stoke the king's rage. Rhaegar stepped forward with Lyanna by his side, their cloaks trailing on the marble floor. "Father," he said, bowing respectfully, "I have returned to speak of my marriage and reassure you of my loyalty." Aerys' gaunt face contorted. "Loyalty? You speak of loyalty to a father you've shamed? You speak of loyalty after wedding a wolf without my consent, after ignoring your lawful wife Elia." His words reverberated through the throne room like a whip crack. Guards shifted uneasily. Lyanna stiffened but held her tongue. She had prepared for hostility, but the venom in Aerys's voice was more potent than she had imagined. Rhaegar's voice remained calm, but the tension vibrated in the air around him. Father, House Martell remains a valued ally. Elia and I have spoken, and she understands, eh? Aerys barked a laugh, cutting him off. Understands? By all the fires of old Valyria, you think to enthrall me with talk of alliances? What I see is a betrayal, a conspiracy to place a wolf on the throne. Or to supplant me altogether. He shifted on the blades of the throne, ignoring the cuts that pricked his skin. Treason, he hissed. Rhaegar's expression flickered with alarm. We seek no conspiracy, no supplanting. I remain your son and heir. But the realm must be secured, father. The Storm Lord Robert Baratheon Stokes talk of rebellion. My marriage was intended to foster peace between North and South, to unify the kingdom. You must see reason. Reason. Aerys spat. You marry a wolf against my command and then dare speak to me of reason? My eyes are open, Rhaegar. I see your ploys. I see how your songs and harp have beguiled the lords and how you seduced the North into your camp. Begone from my sight. Take your whore of a wolf with you and do not speak to me again of loyalty, or I shall have your heads on spikes. Do you hear me? Heads on spikes. A ragged silence followed his outburst. The courtiers stared, aghast, while Lyanna's cheeks burned with anger. But Rhaegar held firm. Bowing stiffly, he guided Lyanna backward, away from the dais and out of the throne room. Aerys's mad laughter echoed behind them, bouncing off the stone columns like the cackling of a vengeful phantom. Outside, in a corridor lined with Targaryen tapestries, Rhaegar let out a shuddering breath. He turned to a steward. Send a raven to all the major lords immediately, he said quietly. Our king is not well. If we cannot secure his reason, we must ensure the realm does not tear itself apart. Lyanna studied him, her heart pounding. She saw the frustration etched in every line of his face, but also a grim determination. This was not the end, it was merely the beginning of a far more dangerous game. They retreated to the prince's chambers in the Red Keep. Rhaegar's guard sealed the doors, preventing any intrusion. Lyanna examined the room, so different from her beloved Winterfell, with its high windows overlooking the city and the sea beyond. She turned to Rhaegar. Your father's reaction was worse than we feared. Will he try to have us killed? Rhaegar hesitated. He might, but I still believe in a peaceful solution. We must rally the loyal lords, show that we pose no threat to the crown so long as my father remains stable. Perhaps if enough voices clamor for unification, his small council can sway him to temper his madness. She approached him, laying a comforting hand on his arm. And what if he refuses to be swayed? Rhaegar closed his eyes, recalling the illusions he once held that he could guide his father to see reason. Then we must be prepared. We will not start a war, but neither will we let him destroy the realm. Over the next weeks, missives flooded the Red Keep. Some lords pledged fealty to Aerys, not out of love but out of fear. Others quietly declared support for Rhaegar, trusting in his reputation for fairness, his intelligence, and the sense of destiny that clung to him. Yet still more remained uncertain. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that Robert Baratheon was gathering forces in the Stormlands, fueled by his personal vendetta and aided by loyal bannermen outraged that Lyanna Stark had been stolen from him. The tension began to coil like a serpent in the heart of the Seven Kingdoms. Determined to prevent chaos, Rhaegar arranged audiences with Lord Tywin Lannister, who had once served as Hand of the King with a firm and respected grip. Tywin arrived at court wearing that cold, calculating expression that made lesser men quiver. He listened to Rhaegar's earnest appeal, then cast a glance at Lyanna. She met his gaze, refusing to wilt under the lion's stare. Tywin spoke quietly and with an air of practiced neutrality. The realm is on the brink, my prince. Should your father's madness lead us to open conflict, which side do you imagine I will choose? The side of a mad king, or the side of a prince who has disregarded tradition and, some argue, betrayed House Martell? Rhaegar stiffened. I seek no betrayal. Elia is dear to me, but the realm, Tywin held up a hand. I am no stranger to politics, your grace. The question is whether the realm sees you as its future or as a usurper of your father's rule. I urge caution. If war breaks out, House Lannister will align itself in a way that ensures our survival and prosperity, as we have always done. After Tywin's departure, Rhaegar let out a frustrated sigh. Lyanna was the one who pointed out that Tywin's words, while callous, hinted at a possibility. If they could present a unified front, if they could show that Rhaegar was the realm's best hope for stability, Tywin might throw his formidable weight behind the prince. Especially if it became clear that King Aerys was beyond redemption. In the days that followed, Lyanna busied herself visiting the small folk in Flea Bottom, handing out bread and speaking to them candidly. She wanted them to see that this new princess was not some aloof southern lady but a Stark, a northerner with a fierce heart who cared for their welfare. Bit by bit, she gleaned the true pulse of the city. They loved Rhaegar, or at least admired the shining image of the dragon prince who sang for them, but they feared King Aerys's unpredictable wrath. Many had lost family members when Aerys burned men alive on the faintest suspicion of treachery. They also worried that any conflict might see the city sacked or starved. Lyanna returned to the Red Keep, more convinced than ever that the key to peace was to mitigate the king's madness and quell Robert's rebellious stirrings. Otherwise, the people of the city, indeed the entire realm, would suffer. At long last, Robert made his move. Word arrived that he had marched north to the Riverlands, forging an alliance with House Tully and calling on others to join him. His message was simple. Rhaegar Targaryen had kidnapped his betrothed, stolen her away to force marriage, and now meant to supplant the rightful king. Robert's skill at winning men's hearts was legendary. He spoke of a realm free of Targaryen tyranny, a realm rid of the madness that lurked on the throne. Many flocked to his banner. Yet this time, events diverged from the more tragic path they might have taken in another turn of fate. Rather than letting suspicion and rumor fester, Rhaegar acted. He rode out with Lyanna at his side and a carefully assembled host of loyal Crownlander knights, as well as a sizable northern contingent that had come south after receiving private letters from Rickard Stark. They halted in the Riverlands near Harrenhal once again, in a wide field by the God's Eye, setting up opposing camps not far from Robert's forces. The stage was set for Parley. It was an uneasy meeting, held on a stretch of grass outside Harrenhal's looming black walls. On one side stood Robert, tall and broad-shouldered, a hammer slung across his back, righteous fury in his blue eyes. Ned Stark, who had joined him out of confusion and familial loyalty, watched anxiously. On the other side, Rhaegar, regal in gleaming armor, his Targaryen banner at his back, stood with Lyanna, who wore no crown but carried herself as one who was equal to any prince. Robert strode forward, barely reining in his anger. "You took her from me?" he snarled, pointing an accusing finger at Rhaegar. "You dishonored the vow we had, the betrothal. You humiliated me before the realm. Did you think I would let that stand?" Lyanna stepped forward, surprising everyone. "I was not stolen, Robert. I went willingly. I chose this path of my own free will. There was no dishonor except in the eyes of those who refused to see the truth." For a moment, Robert's rage gave way to something that looked like pain. "You were mine," he murmured. "Promised to me since we were children. Why, Lyanna?" She hesitated, knowing her words could wound him more deeply than any sword thrust. "Because I would not live as a trophy for you to flaunt. Because I saw another path, a chance to heal this realm, to prevent more bloodshed. And because I love him." Those last words hung in the tense air. Robert's expression darkened. "This is treason. The realm was promised an heir from House Baratheon and House Stark. Now you've thrown that away for the sake of the dragon spawn." Rhaegar's voice cut through the tension like a calm tide. "We do not seek war, Robert. My father's madness places the realm in danger. The houses fight among themselves, and every day the threat grows. Let us not drown the land in blood over a betrothal or an insult. You claim you have come to save Lyanna, but she is neither captive nor in need of rescue." Robert's men muttered, shifting behind him. Some looked uneasy, as though they had not anticipated that Lyanna would stand so openly with Rhaegar. Others clutched their weapons, fully prepared for battle. The wind stirred the grass between them, carrying the tang of the lake in the distance. Robert sneered. "If your father is mad, then remove him from the throne. Let the realm see you do it. But don't hide behind my beloved's name, Targaryen. Show your true face. Admit you mean to wear the crown." Lyanna felt a pang of pity for Robert. She remembered him from earlier days, how gallant he had been, how certain of his love for her. This turn of fate was cruel to him, but she could not feign regrets for her choice. "We can find a peaceful means," she urged. "If you bring your forces together with ours, if we stand united, We can force King Aerys to stand down or step aside without a wholesale slaughter." For a moment, it seemed Robert might listen. His gaze flicked to Ned, who stood with the calm heartbreak of a man torn between two dear friends. Ned finally spoke, voice measured. "Robert, you have your grievances, but we must think of the realm. The North is behind Lyanna's choice. My father gave his blessing, though it was a hard one. If we begin a war, countless innocents will die, and the realm may shatter." Robert's eyes blazed, but the presence of Ned by Lyanna's side gave him pause. He bit his lip, glanced back at his bannermen, and then spat on the ground. "I'll not bend the knee to that mad king. If Rhaegar wants to displace his father, let him do it outright. And if you stand with him, Ned, then may the gods help us all." Before violence could break out, the neutral parties, particularly lords from the Riverlands, urged calm. They agreed to a short truce to see if any negotiations might bear fruit. Under the watchful eye of Harrenhal's towering walls, the two sides set up tents at a careful distance. Over the next several days, envoys darted back and forth, carrying messages and attempts at compromise. Inside Rhaegar's tent, lit by flickering lanterns, Lyanna, Ned, and several loyal lords debated the best approach to handle Robert's fury. They all recognized the risk. Robert's pride was wounded, and many of his men had rallied around him in the name of deposing the Targaryen line. If Aerys refused to step down or be reasoned with, the conflict would escalate. Ned suggested a council be formed to judge the king's fitness to rule, referencing precedent in the realm's history. Perhaps if enough great lords agreed that Aerys was unfit, he could be lawfully deposed or placed under guardianship, allowing Rhaegar to rule as regent. It was a fragile plan, built on the hope that the threat of rebellion alone might intimidate Aerys into agreeing. Rhaegar understood this was a gamble, but it seemed better than open war. He scribbled letters by candlelight, summoning every major house to a grand council in King's Landing, urging them to come prepared to judge the king's behavior. Lyanna helped pen these letters, feeling the weight of the realm pressing on her shoulders. She had been a girl who loved to ride and laugh, now thrust into a position of monumental responsibility. Yet she held fast, driven by the conviction that the Seven Kingdoms needed to heal from the cycle of violence and madness. The day the letters were sent, an unexpected arrival caught the camp off guard. Ser Barristan and Selmy rode in alone, bearing a message from the king. He asked for an audience with Rhaegar in private. The Targaryen prince obliged, meeting him just outside the camp perimeter in a quiet copse of trees. Lyanna, anxious, waited while the two men spoke. Barristan, a knight of unquestionable honor, relayed the contents of the king's new decree. Rhaegar was proclaimed a traitor, and his marriage to Lyanna Stark was declared null and void. Anyone who sheltered them would be named an enemy of the crown. Aerys demanded they turn themselves in for trial. Rhaegar dismissed the idea of surrender. He thanked Barristan and asked for the Knights' Council. Barristan, loyal to the royal family but also possessed of a keen sense of justice, confessed he was torn. Aerys had grown unpredictable, dangerous to the realm. Yet Barristan had sworn an oath to defend the king. Ultimately, he bowed to Rhaegar and said if a council were indeed convened, he would do what his honor required. With that, he returned to King's Landing, leaving Rhaegar to deliver the grim news to Lyanna. Though despair threatened, Rhaegar refused to be cowed. He summoned the lords once more and declared they had two choices: yield to Aerys' tyranny or unite to remove him. An undercurrent of shock wove through the gathering. Never had the prince spoken so openly about his father's deposition. Still, the Targaryens had always believed in the notion that if a king was truly unfit, some measure must be taken. And with each day, more lords arrived in camp, bearing witness to Robert's fervor and the king's madness. Many believed Rhaegar was the realm's best hope for peace. Weeks wore on. Through careful diplomacy, messengers galloped across Westeros, inviting lords to King's Landing under a banner of safe passage and a promise that hostilities would cease during this grand council. Robert grumbled, suspecting a Targaryen trick, but Ned convinced him to at least see it through. The scattered seeds of conflict seemed poised to sprout into civil war at any moment, yet the possibility remained that a council could prevent widespread bloodshed. Finally, the day came when the largest assembly of great lords in a generation converged upon King's Landing. The Red Keep's throne room was packed. Seats were arranged in tiers, each region's representatives placed with careful order. A hush descended as Rhaegar, in full princely regalia, escorted King Aerys into the throne room. The king's glare was baleful, but he was surrounded by guards and had little choice in the matter. Enough swords were pointed in his direction that he could not act on impulse without risking immediate capture or worse. Among the gathered were the lords Tyrell, Arryn, Tully, Stark, Baratheon, Lannister, Martell, speaking on behalf of Princess Elia, and numerous bannermen. The High Septons stood in attendance, along with the masters of various knightly orders. It was an unprecedented gathering, tense with the knowledge that the slightest spark could ignite chaos. But Rhaegar raised his voice, carrying with clear authority, and appealed to the council. "My lords, we gather to judge the fitness of the king to rule. Grave accusations have been made. Evidence of his burning of subjects, his disregard for the realm's welfare, and his condemnation of my lawful marriage to Lyanna Stark weighs upon us. By the ancient customs of the realm, if a king is mad or tyrannical, the great lords have a duty to protect the kingdom from further harm. I ask you to consider King Aerys' actions and do what is just." A murmur spread among the lords. Robert bristled, arms folded across his chest. He wanted nothing more than to see Aerys gone. Lord Tywin rose, golden hair gleaming, and spoke in a voice that carried across the hall. He listed the king's abuses, from unjust executions to his suspicious handling of the recent lords who had dared question his authority. Ned Stark, standing with his father Rhaegar at his side, recounted the times King Aerys had threatened to burn the north. Representatives from Dorne looked pained but also acknowledged the king's instability. Even Pycelle, the Grand Maester, could not in good conscience defend everything Aerys had done. King Aerys attempted to speak, screaming about betrayal, about how they were all traitors scheming to usurp his rightful throne. He threatened to unleash wildfire upon the city. Guards moved closer, weapons at the ready. Finally, the king was forced into silence. The council took a vote. Lord Arryn, as a respected older statesman, tallied the outcome. By an overwhelming majority, the great lords declared King Aerys too unfit to rule. A mixture of relief and dread rippled across the throne room. Now the question remained what to do next. Some demanded Aerys be executed for his crimes. Others, including Ned, voiced a more measured approach, suggesting he be imprisoned or placed in a guarded keep to live out his days. The final decision rested largely on Rhaegar, who had the greatest claim and the greatest stake. He looked around the throne room, lingering for a moment on Lyanna's steady gaze and then on Elia Martell's resigned expression. Finally he spoke. "The realm has seen enough death by fire and sword. My father will be confined, guarded, and cared for as befits one who has lost his reason. He shall remain in a secure chamber far from the city where he can harm no one, including himself. Let the bloodshed end here." Amid a storm of murmurs, the resolution took shape. King Aerys was escorted away by the king's guard, stripped of power. With that, Rhaegar was proclaimed the new king of Westeros by the council. The High Septon stepped forward, placing a hand on Rhaegar's brow in a symbolic gesture of blessing. Trumpets sounded, though not as triumphantly as they might have for a coronation free of conflict. The news spread through the city streets. Aerys Targaryen was deposed and Rhaegar Targaryen was king. Lyanna felt a swell of emotion. The entire realm seemed to shift beneath her feet, as though the earth itself recognized that a new age had dawned. Beside her, Robert lingered, hammer in hand, expression uncertain. The victory he had wanted, toppling the Targaryens, had come in a form he had never imagined. Ned placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, whispering that they must accept this outcome. For a moment, Robert looked at Lyanna with eyes that carried a tempest of hurt and longing, but also a faint trace of respect. Then he turned away. In the days after Rhaegar's ascension, he was crowned in a formal ceremony, wearing the ancient Targaryen crown. Lyanna stood at his side, recognized officially as his queen. The lords and ladies of the realm knelt, though some did so grudgingly. In that moment, Lyanna felt the full force of the realm's expectations settle upon her shoulders. She was no longer just the she-wolf from the north. She was queen of the Seven Kingdoms, a unifying figure bridging the line of dragons and wolves. Yet tensions still simmered. Robert's men were not entirely reconciled. Dorne was affronted that Elia Martell had been pushed aside, though she retained her title of princess and was treated with every courtesy. House Martell demanded assurances for Elia's children, Rhaegar's children, and for Dorne's place in the new order. House Lannister held its cards close, prepared to seize upon any sign of weakness. Rhaegar knew he must move carefully, establishing his legitimacy through acts that showcased fairness and stability. He began by appointing a new small council, choosing wise and respected figures rather than sycophants. He named Jon Arryn as Hand of the King, an elder statesman admired for his honor. He invited Tywin Lannister to remain as an advisor on finance and administration. a gesture that appealed to the Lannister ambition. He made conciliatory moves toward Dorne, promising that Princess Alya's children remained legitimate Targaryen heirs, with full rights and privileges. This softened Dornish outrage, at least for the moment. Lyanna took on the mantle of queen with a resolve that surprised many. She refused to be sidelined as a mere ornament in the court. She set up a distribution of food for the poor in King's Landing, drawing upon the North's hardy traditions of caring for neighbors during harsh winters. She met with lords from all corners, forging relationships and learning the realm's complexities. The small folk gradually came to adore her direct manner, though some southern ladies whispered that she was too bold, too unrefined. Lyanna dismissed such gossip with the same casual indifference she might have shown to a blackfly buzzing around her head. At night, in the privacy of their chambers, Rhaegar confided in her the doubts that plagued him. "What if I fail?" he murmured, his silver hair brushing against her cheek. "What if my father's madness lingers in our bloodline, and one day I find myself succumbing to the same dark impulses?" Lyanna cradled his head gently, pressing her forehead to his. "Then I'll be here to steer you away from that path. We forge our own destiny, Rhaegar, and you are not your father." Together, they faced the monumental task of mending a fractured kingdom. They visited the Stormlands, where Robert's grudging acceptance was put on display. The new king knelt at Storm's End's massive gates to greet Robert in friendship, offering him a position on the small council as Master of War. Robert, still nursing a shattered heart, hesitated. But Ned's quiet urging, combined with the knowledge that open rebellion would only destabilize the realm he claimed to love, convinced him to accept. In the north, Rhaegar and Lyanna stood before the gathered houses at Winterfell. The northern lords, typically aloof to southern politics, found themselves in a curious position. They looked upon Lyanna with pride, for she was one of their own, now a queen. Rhaegar bent the knee to Rickard Stark as a sign of respect for the northern traditions. He reaffirmed the North's rights to self-govern aspects of its territory, promising not to impose any sweeping changes that disregarded northern culture. This gesture won the North's loyalty. In the Vale, the king recognized Jon Arryn's steadfast guardianship of the region. In the Riverlands, he offered restitution to families harmed under Aerys's reign, ensuring some measure of justice. In the Reach, he extended a gracious hand to the Tyrells, acknowledging their wealth and agricultural might. Gradually, through these gestures, Rhaegar cemented alliances that once seemed impossible, all the while carrying Lyanna's counsel in his ear. Her directness and empathy tempered his more poetic, visionary nature. Peace, however tenuous, took root. There were whispers that the new king had been guided by the concept of the prince that was promised, some ancient prophecy Rhaegar had once been obsessed with. Yet under Lyanna's influence, his focus shifted from prophecy to tangible governance. He still believed in destiny, but he recognized that if prophecy were to be fulfilled, it would be through strengthening the realm, not letting it burn. Elia Martell lived in gentle dignity at court, her children recognized as Targaryens of full birthright. Lyanna treated her with kindness, aware of the heartbreak she must bear. Over time, a fragile bond formed between the two women. Elia was a gracious soul who loved Rhaegar's children deeply. Lyanna respected that devotion, acknowledging that her own marriage had hurt Elia. In the years that followed, they found a strange accord, each ensuring the other's children had a place in the realm's future. Robert Baratheon's anger did not vanish overnight, but the king's readiness to show him respect and offer him a crucial role in defending the realm's borders soothed some of his pride. He still drank and glowered, muttering about how he should have been the one to marry Lyanna. But duty proved a balm for his wounded pride. His skill on the battlefield against outlaws, raiders, or any external threat kept him occupied and gave him the glory he craved. Amid all this political maneuvering, Rhaegar and Lyanna found moments of genuine peace. They rode out of the Red Keep at dawn, galloping along the King's Road or hunting in the forests, a small retinue following at a distance. They laughed together, two young souls who had forged an unlikely bond. In the privacy of their solar, Rhaegar would play the harp and Lyanna would rest her head against his shoulder, allowing the haunting melodies to wash away the day's tensions. Their love, once thought of as a spark that might ignite the realm, became instead a steady flame guiding it toward stability. The years passed and Lyanna gave birth to a son, Jon. They named him, in honor of Jon Arryn's support and as a nod to the northern tradition of strong, simple names. Rhaegar held the child with reverence, mindful of the responsibilities placed upon such a young life. Elaya's children, Aegon and Rhaenys, welcomed their half-brother without bitterness. They grew up together in the Red Keep's courtyards, forging sibling bonds that transcended the complexities of their parents' relationships. The realm saw in that union of children something it had never truly witnessed. Targaryen and Stark, Martell and Dragon, all under one roof, united rather than torn apart by strife. Unrest never truly vanished. There were constant grumblings about how swiftly Rhaegar had seized power. Rumors circulated that wildfire caches remained hidden beneath King's Landing, that Aerys had left behind a final trap. Some whispered that pockets of Targaryen loyalists still believed in Aerys as the rightful king, wanting to restore him if they could. Yet King Rhaegar's willingness to govern with an even hand, to listen to counsel rather than ignoring it, quieted many of these threats. His marriage to Lyanna Stark, once decried as scandalous, was now seen by many as a symbol of the realm's ability to reconcile differences. Still others claimed that a day would come when the North or the Martells would revolt, spurred by latent resentments. But no revolt materialized, not as long as Rhaegar and Lyanna stood united. Even Robert eventually found a path to acceptance. He never admitted it outright, but some nights after too many cups of strong wine, he'd mutter to Ned that Lyanna had found her happiness. He'd punch Ned in the arm and demand to know if any boar in the Kingswood was worthy of his hammer. On one such evening, Ned gently offered, "You might find happiness yourself, Robert, if you look for it beyond the memories of my sister." To that, Robert merely grunted, but in time, he did wed, forging his own alliances and finding some semblance of contentment. King Rhaegar's reign was not entirely free of conflict. The Ironborn tested his mettle by raiding the Reach's coasts, prompting a swift and punishing response. In the Dornish marches, age-old disputes flared up from time to time, but Rhaegar's careful attention to Dorne's needs, counseled by Elia, kept them from erupting into a full-scale rebellion. Each challenge tested the unity he and Lyanna had worked so hard to foster, and each time they met those challenges head-on, forging a reputation for strength tempered by empathy. Through it all, Lyanna's northern heart remained constant. She insisted they celebrate certain customs of the old gods alongside the Seven, embracing her heritage openly. Rhaegar, despite his Targaryen upbringing, would join her in the Godwood, a small cluster of heart trees carefully tended in King's Landing, to offer silent prayers. This blending of faiths scandalized some Septons, but it also highlighted the realm's new spirit of compromise. Children born to House Targaryen now had both southern and northern traditions woven into their upbringing, a reflection of the dual heritage that once threatened to tear the realm apart but now held it together. As the years stretched on, a sense of cautious optimism spread among the smallfolk. They remembered the horrors of the Mad King. They remembered the rumors of war that had nearly consumed them. But those horrors receded like a storm that had dissipated on the horizon, leaving behind the promise of renewal. Streets were safer under the gold cloaks, no longer subject to the king's capricious decrees. Taxes were restructured to ensure fairness, if not always lightness. Each improvement, each policy was another building block in the foundation of a new era. In time, King Rhaegar's silver hair became threaded with strands of white, and Lyanna's once raven-dark locks held wisps of silver as well. The children thrived. Aegon became a bold youth who excelled at both sword and pen, Rhaenys a quick-witted girl who would one day prove her skill in diplomacy, and Jon, the boy who bore a northern name, grew tall and solemn. A quiet observer with an inner strength that reminded Lyanna of Ned. The seeds of a strong lineage were sown, guarded by the lessons that their parents had paid for in heartbreak and near bloodshed. Some nights, when the moon lit up the city and the flicker of torches glowed along the ramparts, Rhaegar and Lyanna would walk together, hand in hand, recalling the day they had stood before the weirwood at Harrenhal. That single decision, to wed publicly, to unite their houses openly, had changed everything. They would speak in hushed voices of what might have been had they not acted so boldly. Perhaps the realm would have been drenched in blood, with Robert's rebellion raging, Tywin choosing sides at the last moment, the North rising in fury. Perhaps the city would have burned under wildfire, the Targaryens wiped out, the wolves left to pick at the carcass. But none of that had come to pass. Their choice had not been without cost, especially for Elia Martell and Robert Baratheon, both of whom had to relinquish their dreams. But it also paved the way for a different kind of future, one where dragons and wolves, storms and suns, lions and flowers all might find a measure of balance under a king who strove for wisdom rather than tyranny. On one such moonlit stroll, Lyanna leaned against the battlements, gazing at the stars as they shimmered in the black sky. Rhaegar stood beside her, his cloak fluttering. She felt his hand slip into hers, warm and certain. "We are still here," he said softly, almost in wonder. She turned to him, eyes shining with the echoes of the hardships they had endured and the victories they had won. "We made our choices. We faced the consequences." He inclined his head, thoughtful. "I once believed in a grand prophecy, in signs and portents that foretold a hero reborn to fight a coming darkness. But the real battle, it seems, was always within ourselves, our pride, our fear, our capacity for destruction. And we fought it together." She let her gaze drift back to the stars. "The winter snows will come one day. The realm will face more trials, from within or without. But if we stand together, if we lead with compassion and strength, we'll endure." He smiled at her, a soft, unguarded smile that recalled the days when he was just a prince with a harp and she was a girl who dreamed of riding free. "You are my strength, Lyanna. My queen, my wolf. I never would have found this path without you." She returned his smile. "Nor I without you." Their fingers entwined and they stood there, watching over a city at peace, a realm that owed its fragile harmony to a moment of defiance and a vow spoken in front of gods old and new. They had faced suspicion, anger, and madness. They had confronted the ghosts of tradition and the looming threat of anarchy. But they had persevered, forging a new legacy for House Targaryen and House Stark. In the annals of Westeros, the marriage of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, held publicly at Harrenhal, became a legendary tale. Minstrels sang of the day the dragon wed the wolf in defiance of a mad king's wrath, weaving romance and rebellion into every note. Some songs might have painted it as a tragic affair, but in truth it was a testament to how choice and courage could alter the course of history. Whispers of that fateful day spread through taverns and palaces alike, each retelling adding a flourish of drama but all agreeing on one simple truth, that the public union had saved the realm from a war that would have ravaged the Seven Kingdoms. The dragon and the wolf had found each other in time to avert disaster, guiding the realm toward an age of measured prosperity and, if not perfect harmony, at least a peace hard-won and cherished. Thus ended the final thread of Targaryen madness under King Aerys, replaced by a reign where the fiery banner of House Targaryen flew beside the dire wolf of House Stark, symbolizing not chaos but unity. And so they lived, forging a path for their children, for the entire land, embodying the idea that the union of fire and ice need not herald destruction, it could become the very pillar of strength, if guided by love and tempered by wisdom. And in the hush of the night, beneath the drifting light of stars that spanned the sky from Dorne to the Wall, Rhaegar and Lyanna remembered a simpler time when all they had was a song and a crown of blue winter roses, and they smiled at how far they had come, and how the realm had followed. Rhaegar Targaryen woke before dawn in the royal bedchamber, feeling the autumn chill in the air despite the warmth of the heavy quilts draped over him and Lyanna. The first faint light of day crept through the tall windows, illuminating the old tapestry along the far wall, dragons spiraling above the trident, woven in red and gold. Rhaegar had always found comfort in symbolic imagery, but of late he realized how easily a realm could be beguiled by the promise of images rather than the reality of rule. His father's mania had proven that the grandeur of Targaryen iconography could not hide the rot in a king's mind. Quietly, he slipped from the bed, pulled on a thick robe, and moved to the balcony. From their chambers in the Red Keep, the city sprawled below, twisting alleyways stirring awake with the slow, steady murmur of morning commerce. He heard the distant calls of dockworkers by the Blackwater Rush, saw tiny figures crossing the city gates to bring goods from the farms beyond. A piece of him remembered the day he had publicly crowned Lyanna at Harrenhal, the hush and awe from the assembled lords, the unstoppable momentum that had carried them here, to a realm under his rule and hers. Was it truly the best outcome for everyone? The realm still bore bruises from Aerys' tyranny, and Robert Baratheon's bitterness lingered like a dull ache just beneath the surface. Yet all in all, peace had become more than just a whisper. With each passing month, they stitched the wounds a bit tighter, made the kingdom a touch stronger. He felt the soft brush of Lyanna's hand on his shoulder. She had awakened silently, her dark hair wild tumble around her face. Her gray eyes were sharp even in the half-light. He leaned back against her, taking a rare moment to let the burdens of kingship slip away. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, voice low. He half-smiled. "Old habit." Once I woke early to play my harp, thinking about lost glories and prophecies. Now it's letters and concerns of the court that rouse me." She let her chin rest on his shoulder. "We never expected peace to be simple. Still, we're doing more good than harm. That's not something many rulers can say." He turned to look at her, the lines of his face relaxing. "I won't argue that. At times, I wonder if all I once believed about destiny and signs was nothing but a child's dream. The real triumph seems to be forging alliances that keep Westeros from devouring itself." Lyanna gave him a gentle smile. "Maybe the real prophecy was that you'd learn how to rule, not just wear a crown." They stood together in the early chill, content to share the quiet. Within the hour, scribes and stewards would arrive, the corridors would fill with courtiers petitioning for royal favor, and another day of governance would begin. But right now, they were just a man and a woman who had defied what seemed an unbreakable tradition, Targaryen scion wed to a Stark of the North. In those first glimmers of dawn, they drew strength from each other's presence. When they dressed and entered the corridors, they found Jon Arryn waiting in the solar. He served as Hand of the King, and the weight of that responsibility sometimes pinched his features with worry. The older man inclined his head respectfully when Rhaegar and Lyanna appeared. The solar's long windows cast rectangles of light across the stone floor, and a coterie of clerks hovered nearby. Jon Arryn cleared his throat. "Your Graces, I've received reports of unrest along the Dornish marches. Another minor border clash between some of the Marcher lords and Dornish scouts. It seems small, but Lord Tyrell has already sent a raven urging a more decisive approach." Lyanna caught the flicker of anxiety in the hand's eyes. The Dornish marches had long been a tinderbox. Even though Elia Martell lived here in the Red Keep with her children, forging a fragile amity with Lyanna, centuries of animosity could not vanish overnight between Dorne and the Stormlands and Reach. She exchanged a look with Rhaegar, recalling the promises they'd made to Dorne after his coronation. The Martells had demanded security and recognition for Elia's children. Rhaegar had granted that, but old feuds clung to the land like brambles. Rhaegar nodded, his hand rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I'll send a conciliatory envoy to both sides. Let them know the crown is watching. Hostages might even be exchanged to ensure good behavior, but I want no heavy-handed approach. We can't escalate, we must quell it." Jon Arryn agreed. "Very wise, Your Grace. Also, Prince Doran Martell writes that he's worried about Elia's well-being. He wonders if we'd consider letting her spend more time in Sunspear, away from the tensions of the capital." Lyanna felt a twinge in her chest. She admired Elia's grace and recognized how difficult it must be to live with the man who had once been her husband, now married to someone else, though that arrangement had been tangled in prophecies and politics. Elia and Rhaegar's children, Aegon and Rhaenys, spent time with both parents. The Red Keep was their primary home, but they often traveled to Dorne. Perhaps letting Elia stay there for a while, especially if it suited her health or peace of mind, might help. Lyanna said, "I see no harm. So long as the children remain recognized and included in court life, Elia deserves the comfort of her homeland. The Martells have been patient. We must never forget that courtesy." Rhaegar glanced at her, gratitude in his eyes. He knew that a lesser queen might have bristled at Elia's presence or tried to hamper the children's status, but Lyanna had taken the opposite approach. "We'll draft a reply to Prince Doran," he told Jon Arryn. "We'll offer to host him here or to arrange a safe journey for Elia if she truly wishes to return to Sunspear for a season." Jon Arryn inclined his head. "Very good, Your Graces. I'll see to the letters at once." Lyanna settled into a chair at the table where morning wine and bread waited. Rhaegar took a seat across from her, reaching for a quill. As the day stretched on, the business of ruling hammered away at them, tax reforms to discuss, letters from the area about mountain clans, warnings from the Iron Islands that new raids might be on the horizon. Guards changed shifts outside the solar, and the clerks moved in and out. When midday arrived, a brief recess allowed them to partake in a small meal. Lyanna could see the strain in Rhaegar's eyes. Her once dreamy, harp-playing prince was now consumed by the rigors of kingship. Yet she also saw how he glowed with purpose. He had become adept at balancing the swirling demands of lords who distrusted each other, forging uneasy truces one small step at a time. In the afternoon, a soft knock preceded the entrance of Ser Barristan Selmy. The old knight greeted them politely. His white cloak flowed behind him with that quiet dignity he always carried. "Your Graces, Lord Robert Baratheon has arrived at the gates unannounced." Lyanna's gaze jumped to Rhaegar, who raised an eyebrow. Robert's visits were sporadic. He was not the type to enjoy lingering in King's Landing. He spent more time at Storm's End or traveling with his retinue to tournaments and hunts. But they had parted on terms that might be called amicable, if not warm. Robert served as master of war on the small council, though in truth he seemed more interested in feasts and hunts than day-to-day governance. Still, Rhaegar's generosity had given him a seat at the table, and Robert occasionally visited to stay informed. "Show him in," said Rhaegar, voice measured. "We can't very well bar the city gates to one of my highest lords." It took some minutes, but eventually Robert strode into the solar, face ruddy from the wind, thick shoulders clad in a dark blue cloak pinned by a golden stag brooch. He was older, too, as they all were. The once reckless fire in his eyes had dulled to an ember, but that ember burned hot when he saw Lyanna. He dipped his head in greeting. "Your Graces." Rhaegar bade him sit, while Lyanna did not miss the faint tension in the lines of Robert's jaw. Memories flooded her. Once she had teased him in Winterfell's courtyard, calling him a great, gallant fool. She could still picture him laughing in the snow, making jests, and promising her the world. So much had changed. "Robert," said Rhaegar, "this is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you to King's Landing unannounced?" Robert cleared his throat and shifted uncomfortably. "A pleasure? Perhaps. I come with news, not all of it pleasant. We have trouble in the Stepstones. Pirates sell sails, some are calling themselves the Golden Company. The word is they're only a fraction of that infamous band. They're raiding ships that sail for Westeros. They've seized a few merchant vessels from the Stormlands, and I'll not stand for that. I thought the crown should know before I take matters into my own hands." Rhaegar listened, brow furrowing. The Golden Company is a well-known mercenary company in Essos with ties to the old Blackfire rebellions. If they truly threaten Westerosi ships, we must act. But we should do so carefully. The last thing we need is to provoke a full-scale confrontation across the narrow sea. Robert scowled. "Careful, yes. But these bastards only respond to steel. I can raise men, perhaps enough to mount a quick strike in the Stepstones. That might teach them to fear the might of the Iron Throne." Jon Arryn, standing at the side, exchanged a glance with Lyanna. She realized that, as Master of War, Robert wanted the green light to muster a royal fleet or an army for an expedition. A show of force might be necessary. She knew from her time in the north that sometimes you had to bare your teeth so the wolves who threatened you would think twice. But she also had come to appreciate Rhaegar's caution. Rhaegar tapped the table with his finger. "We need more information. I won't dispatch half the royal fleet without confirming what we're up against. Let's send a few envoys to investigate. Maybe Ser Miles Mouton or Ser John Connington, someone with a solid head for negotiation but skilled enough for combat if needed." Robert let out a deep breath. "I thought you'd say as much. Fine, but I want to be part of the expedition. My ships, my men. We can't appear weak." "We won't," Rhaegar assured him. "Your presence could lend weight, but we must tread with care. One misstep and we risk opening old wounds from across the sea. Some exiled families still dream of toppling Targaryen rule. They might see a conflict in the Stepstones as an opportunity." Robert's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Better to smash them quickly than give them time to rally. When the meeting concluded, Robert requested a private word with Lyanna. Rhaegar paused, studying them both. For a moment, tension flickered between the men. Rhaegar was king, but Robert Baratheon had once believed himself destined to marry Lyanna. Lyanna placed a reassuring hand on Rhaegar's arm. "It's all right. I'll speak with him briefly." Rhaegar nodded, though she sensed the protective surge in him. He and Jon Arryn stepped from the solar, leaving Lyanna with Robert. The silence between them was thick, reminiscent of heavy clouds before a storm. Robert cleared his throat. "You look well, Lyanna," he said quietly. "Queen suits you. I never doubted you were meant for greatness, though I always imagined it by my side." She met his gaze, trying to soften the steely edge in her voice. "I truly hope you found some contentment, Robert." He shrugged. "I have in my own way. Fine hunts, feasts, the occasional battle. But never mind that. I just had to see with my own eyes that you're safe. Well, sometimes I hear rumors that the Targaryens only keep you as a puppet, that you're overshadowed by the memory of Elia, or overshadowed by Rhaegar's mother, Queen Rhaella, or overshadowed by that whole nest of dragons." Lyanna's mouth twisted into a wry smile. "A puppet? Hardly. I doubt the realm would be as stable if I'd let myself be overshadowed. I have a hand in almost every decision Rhaegar makes, and he's grateful for my counsel. But I appreciate the concern, such as it is." He studied her, as though searching for a flicker of uncertainty. "And you have no regrets?" "None at all." She took a breath. "It's not that simple. I feel sorrow for all that was lost. especially your heartbreak, if I'm honest. But regret? No. I did what I believed was right for me, for my family, for the realm. My life is full, my children, my duties, my husband. I've no regrets about that. His face tightened, but he nodded stiffly. Then I'll not plague you with old words. I just needed to see if I'd been chasing ghosts. You were, she said gently. We both were, in different ways. But time moves on. He let out a grunt, something between acceptance and resignation. I suppose it does. Fare you well, then. I'll take my leave. She watched him stride out, shoulders set. There had been a time when seeing him would have brought awkwardness, guilt, or anger. Now she felt only a faint twinge of the bittersweet. They had all survived, and the realm was the better for it. She hoped Robert could find lasting contentment, though she suspected that heartbreak scarred him too deeply for true peace. Perhaps the best she could hope for was that the embers of his old rage never flared into a true blaze again. Later, when she and Rhaegar reconvened with the small council, the matter of the Stepstones expedition took center stage. Jon Connington, a capable lord with a keen mind for tactics, volunteered to lead the mission. Robert insisted he would accompany them. Ser Barristan Selmy offered to ensure the Kingsguard presence, given the potential for combat. A flurry of planning ensued. Ships to be readied in the royal fleet, ravens to be sent to potential allies in the narrow sea who might provide information on the mercenary group's movements. Lyanna listened intently, occasionally interjecting her thoughts. Local knowledge would be crucial, so they should hire a few trusted captains from Lys or Myr who knew the Stepstones intimately. No one objected. The final plan took shape with surprising swiftness. Once business concluded, Lyanna took her leave. She often spent afternoons in the castle yard, partly to ensure she never lost her skill at riding and swordplay. She refused to become a queen who lived only behind walls, separate from the physical heart of the realm. Today, she found her son, Jon, sparring with a wooden sword under the instruction of Ser Jaime Lannister, a Kingsguard knight known for his exceptional skill. Jon was about 10 now, tall and lean, his dark hair curling at the nape of his neck, his eyes a striking gray that so clearly marked him as a Stark. Yet there was something else in his features, an echo of Rhaegar's quiet intensity. When she approached, Jon was parrying Jaime's careful thrusts. The boy's movements were awkward but determined, sweat beading on his forehead. Jaime was calling out corrections, his voice neither harsh nor especially gentle. Over the years, Jaime had grown from a brash young man to a more measured knight, though he still carried an undercurrent of pride. With his gold hair shining in the midday sun, he stepped back as soon as he noticed the queen. "Your Grace," Jaime greeted, bowing slightly. "Your son shows promise, though I'd say he needs to work on footwork. He's too quick to commit." Lyanna studied her boy, who attempted to stand tall. She saw the small cuts and bruises along his arms from the wooden swords. "He's determined, and that counts for a great deal. My father used to say perseverance can outweigh talent in the end. Keep practicing, Jon." Jon nodded vigorously, cheeks flushed. "Yes, mother." She watched him resume his stance, the wooden sword gripped tightly in his hands. Jaime circled, and they went through another sequence of blocks and thrusts, while Lyanna pointed out small things Jon might fix, relaxing his shoulders, keeping his knees slightly bent. She'd grown up around swords, courtesy of her brothers. Brandon had been brash, Ned quietly proficient, and Benjen agile as a lynx. She smiled at the memory of them teaching her the basics in Winterfell's courtyard, never minding that she was a girl. When Jaime let Jon rest, Lyanna motioned for one of the squires to bring her a wooden sword. She beckoned Jon to face her. The boy, eyes shining with excitement, raised his practice blade. Lyanna took a balanced stance, remembering the countless times she'd dueled with wooden swords in the north. She moved in carefully, letting him strike first. He swung bravely, but she sidestepped, hooking the edge of her sword against his and pushing it aside. "Control," she admonished kindly. "Wait for your opening." Jon corrected himself and tried again. Their wooden blades clacked in the courtyard, attracting the attention of a few passing knights. Lyanna advanced, forcing him to move his feet. Jon's face tightened with concentration. He landed a glancing touch on her side, and though it wasn't a full blow, she made a show of stepping back. "Well done," she murmured. "You see? A sure strike after a well-timed feint is more effective than wild swings." Jaime watched with amusement. Eventually, Lyanna lowered her sword, aware she didn't want to overtire her son. "We'll practice more tomorrow," she said gently. "Off you go to rest and get water." Jon flashed a proud grin, bowed awkwardly, and ran off. Lyanna handed the sword back to the squire, turning to Jaime. You're good with him. Thank you. Jaime offered a small bow. He's a bright lad, your grace. I've no doubt he'll be a fine swordsman and maybe more. Lyanna nodded. He's at that age when every day he grows taller. Soon we'll be looking up at him. Jaime's gaze flickered, and for a moment she thought he might say something more personal, but he only inclined his head and strode away. Left alone, Lyanna took a moment to appreciate the courtyard. A dozen knights were training, a blacksmith hammered away in the corner, and the midday sun shone upon the red walls. The tang of metal and sweat felt oddly comforting, a reminder that some parts of the world remained constant. She decided to visit Elia. Despite the complexities of their relationship, Lyanna had made it her mission to maintain civility, even warmth. She found Elia in her solar, where the princess sat with her daughter Rhaenys reading aloud from an old book of Dornish tales. When Lyanna was announced, Elia placed a ribbon to mark the page and stood, a slight flush on her cheeks. "Your Grace," she said, offering a curtsy that Lyanna waved off. "Elia, please," Lyanna murmured, stepping forward. "You needn't stand on ceremony for me in private." She turned to Rhaenys with a smile. "How are your lessons progressing, my lady?" Rhaenys, now 12, had grown into a poised, curious girl with dark, intelligent eyes. She curtsied. "Very well, Aunt Lyanna. Mother was telling me about the Ghost Hill stories and how the Martells once aided House Toland in a skirmish." Lyanna nodded. "Stories from Dorne are always fascinating. I sometimes think we Northerners have no monopoly on ghostly legends." She turned her gaze to Elia. "I hear you might wish to visit Sunspear for a time." Elia folded her hands gently. "I confess, the dryness of Dorne appeals to my health. Maesters say a warmer climate might help with my breathing. The air in King's Landing grows thick, especially in the heat. But I don't want to cause trouble or give the impression I'm fleeing." Lyanna shook her head. "There is no trouble. The king and I only wish for your comfort. Our arrangement is unique, but it needn't be a prison. Take the time you need, see your family, remember that you're still a princess of Dorne. You have every right to your homeland." Elia's shoulders relaxed. "Thank you. I appreciate the consideration. Rhaenys and Aegon will remain here for their studies, but perhaps they can visit me when the time is right." "Certainly. We'll ensure their safety for any journey," Lyanna promised. "And you'll always have a place here at court. This is as much your home as Dorne is." For a moment, the two women regarded each other across the gentle hush of the solar. Lyanna could sense the swirling emotions beneath Elia's calm exterior, but they had come to a shared understanding. Both cared deeply for Rhaegar's children, and both believed in preserving the fragile peace that bound Dorne to the throne. When Lyanna departed, she felt a small sense of relief. If Elia could find solace in her homeland, it might ease any lingering resentments. The realm had enough challenges without personal bitterness fueling divisions. As she made her way back to the Great Hall, she thought of how her choice at Harrenhal had broken many traditions and many hearts. Yet the realm was better for it. Perhaps that was the highest duty of any royal, to shoulder the burdens so that the common folk and indeed those at court might have a chance at peace. That evening, a modest banquet was held in honor of several visitors from the Vale. Lord Nestor Royce and his kin had come to finalize a trade agreement. The great hall bustled with life, the stone floor polished, torches throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Musicians played softly while the lords and ladies chattered at the tables. Lyanna sat at the dais beside Rhaegar, though she occasionally glanced down to see if Jon, Aegon, and Rhaenys were comporting themselves properly at a lower table among other noble children. The three had formed an unlikely companionship that was the talk of the court, children of different mothers, yet half-siblings who seemed to truly care for one another. Rhaegar leaned toward Lyanna. "We'll need to show courtesy to the Royces. It's important for the Vale's continued support." She nodded. "Of course. They're proud, old-blooded folk. I'll speak with Lady Miranda Royce, see if she's comfortable in the capital." Soon enough, they welcomed the Royces to the dais. Lord Nestor, a broad-shouldered man with a short gray beard, expressed his gratitude for the warm welcome, though he cast looks of awe at Rhaegar. The Royces of Runestone were proud of their runic armor, believed to be of ancient heritage. Lyanna recalled hearing that their house had once boasted a strong runic tradition with rumored magical properties in their heirlooms. She found such legends fascinating, perhaps because the North had its own trove of half-forgotten myth. After exchanging pleasantries, Lady Miranda, a clever woman with a quick laugh, engaged Lyanna in a conversation about the capital. She confessed she was daunted by the Red Keep's grandeur. Lyanna offered sincere reassurance that she herself had found it overwhelming at first. Sharing a laugh bridged the gap between northern directness and Vale formality. Even as they spoke, Lyanna kept an ear open for snippets of gossip from the crowd. Rumors drifted that the Iron Bank of Bravos was offering new loans to certain Westerosi lords, that House Greyjoy might be forging alliances with cell sales in the Stepstones, that certain unscrupulous courtiers were trying to influence the king's small council appointments. By the time the feast wound down, she had a mental list of tidbits to mention to Rhaegar. This was part of her role, to gather knowledge, to sense the realm's undercurrents. She had learned from him how crucial it was to see both the grand scheme and the fine details. A single rumor could turn into a movement if ignored. Afterwards, they retired to their chambers, exhausted by the social obligations. Rhaegar removed his crown with a soft sigh, setting it on a table. Lyanna noticed the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the price of kingship. She stepped behind him, kneading his shoulders gently. He let his head tip back, closing his eyes. "Every day, we juggle more than I ever imagined," he murmured. She leaned forward, resting her chin atop his head. "We do, but we've done well. The realm holds. Each day without war is a small victory." He tilted his head, meeting her gaze. "I sometimes wonder if the realm sees how hard we're trying." "They do," she replied, "but the realm is vast. People in the north or in the Stormlands might not know the daily burdens we face. They only see results. As long as we keep them safe and stable, they'll remain content enough." He turned around, pulling her into an embrace. "And you, my love, are you content?" She smiled against his chest. "Content, tired, proud, sometimes frustrated, sometimes triumphant." His laughter was a quiet rumble. "You mirror my own thoughts perfectly." They shared a tender moment of closeness before preparing for bed. Lyanna imagined the child they had lost to a difficult pregnancy years ago, how different life might be if that babe had lived. She bore the memory quietly, though sometimes it haunted her in the hours before sleep. Still, she cherished Jon's presence all the more, and the warmth of Rhaenys and Aegon, too, who were nearly like her own. Family, she realized, was more than lineage or tradition. It was love, loyalty, and acceptance. In the weeks that followed, the Stepstones expedition loomed larger on the court's agenda. Jon Connington assembled ships in the royal harbor, gathering intelligence from merchants who traded with the free cities. Robert, impatient, pressed for departure as soon as possible. By the time the fleet set sail, banners flying in the early morning light, Lyanna stood on a quay overlooking the sea. She watched the vessels pull away, leaving frothy wakes behind them. Rhaegar had decided to remain behind. He could not risk the king's absence in a realm so tenuous, but he gave Robert and Jon Connington authority to act as needed. Barrist and Selmy also went, partly to keep an eye on Robert's impulsiveness. The city soon buzzed with speculation on how the mission would fare. Some predicted a resounding victory, a quick scattering of the cell sails. Others whispered dire warnings of a larger conspiracy across the narrow sea, possibly old Blackfire pretenders stirring trouble. Lyanna herself tried to focus on the continuing tasks of governance, organizing the harvest and distribution of grain to ensure King's Landing would not starve if the winter was harsh. Mediating disputes between lesser lords who came to the Red Keep seeking justice, hearing the pleas of small folk who said their taxes were too high. One morning, she had a poignant encounter with a woman from Flea Bottom who came petitioning in the throne room, an unusual occurrence since most small folk rarely dared to approach the Iron Throne. But Rhaegar had allowed the day's audience to include anyone with a grievance, trusting in Lyanna's presence to keep the tone more open. The woman was named Arna, and she carried a thin, ragged child on her hip. "Your Graces," Arna said, trembling. "We can't pay the new levy on alehouses. My husband runs a small tavern. If we're taxed so high, we'll lose everything. I beg you to reconsider." Rhaegar frowned slightly, turning to his master of coin, who admitted that a new excise had been placed on small taverns to offset the crown's increased spending on harbor fortifications. It was the kind of policy that, on paper, seemed necessary, but in practice might push impoverished families to the brink. Lyanna leaned forward, gaze on the woman and her child. "What do you propose, Arna?" I'm but a poor woman, Your Grace," she stammered, voice shaky. "I only know we can't pay. Perhaps there's another way." Lyanna exchanged a look with Rhaegar. She sensed his unease. They needed revenue to keep the city safe, pay for the fleet, and manage the crown's debts. But they also could not ignore the hardships of the people. Too much pressure and unrest would bubble up, fueling criminals or resentful factions that might be exploited by enemies of the throne. Rhaegar stood from the throne, and a ripple of surprise went through the gathered courtiers. He descended the steps and gently placed a hand on Arna's shoulder, urging her to relax. "We will not ignore this plea. The city's small folk are as integral to the realm as any lord. I promise to have my master of coin revisit the levy's details. We may not remove it entirely, but we can adjust it to spare those who struggle most." Arna's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. She bowed repeatedly, clutching her child. The courtiers murmured. Lyanna observed the scene with a surge of pride. Once, the Targaryen kings had rarely left the dais, never mind lowered themselves to speak softly to a poor woman. Rhaegar's empathy was not a performance, he genuinely cared. She stepped forward to place a hand on the child's curly head, offering a warm smile. "Go in peace," she whispered. After the audience, they met with the Master of Coin in the council chamber. A heated discussion followed over how best to balance the budget. The crown's finances had improved with Tywin Lannister's oversight, but Tywin was not always lenient towards smallfolk. He believed in discipline and a clear hierarchy. Lyanna and Rhaegar pressed him to find an alternative method, perhaps a slight reallocation from port tariffs or a small cut in some lavish expenditures at court. Tywin eventually agreed to consider it, though he did so with his usual cool reserve. Lyanna suspected that compromise on financial matters was often the hardest to achieve. The result was a revised tax code that protected the smallest taverns and inns from unbearable levies. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it signaled the crown's willingness to bend. Within weeks, word spread through the city that the king and queen had shown mercy. The smallfolk took hope from that, a precious commodity in any realm. Lyanna saw the influence of Eddard Stark's quiet empathy in her decisions and realized she carried her father's sense of justice too. Both men had taught her that leadership was not about lording power over others, but about guiding them through darkness. Meanwhile, ravens arrived from the fleet in the Stepstones. Jon Connington reported that they'd made initial contact with the mercenaries, which were indeed a splinter group that once served under the Golden Company's banner. He believed they were financed by rogue Myrish merchants seeking to disrupt Westerosi trade. The Selsail leaders refused to negotiate unless the crown paid them off, which neither Robert nor Connington intended to do. A naval skirmish seemed inevitable. Lyanna worried about Robert's reaction. He would relish the fight, but it could also lead to unnecessary bloodshed. Weeks became a month and the tension grew. Reports indicated the Selsails had holed up on a rocky isle near the southeastern edge of the Stepstones, fortifying it with archers and small catapults. Then, one dawn, a battered ship limped back to King's Landing, carrying the wounded and a letter bearing Jon Connington's seal. Lyanna and Rhaegar read it in the council chamber, the hush broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. "We have engaged the enemy. They are fewer in number than feared, but well entrenched. Lord Robert led a frontal assault on their main fortification, and the fighting was fierce. Ser Barristan Selmy was wounded, though not mortally, in a sortie. We captured or killed most of the mercenaries. However, we discovered signs that they possessed caches of gold from an unknown benefactor. I suspect possible ties to houses exiled from Westeros long ago, or perhaps a faction in Myr or Lys with an interest in sabotage. In any case, the immediate threat is contained. Robert has proven unstoppable on the battlefield, but he thirsts for more answers. We will remain a short while to investigate before returning." Rhaegar set the letter down and looked at Lyanna. Barristan wounded. Robert unstoppable. And a hidden source of gold behind these raids. She exhaled. At least the Selsails are dealt with. The Stepstones remain a nest of vipers, though. We should keep an eye on whomever might be stirring trouble from afar. Old grudges die hard in Essos. Rhaegar nodded. Agreed. Perhaps I'll speak with Varys. He's adept at ferreting out secrets across the narrow sea. Lyanna felt a flicker of distaste. Varys, the master of whisperers, was invaluable but unnerving with his web of spies. Still, it was a necessary apparatus in a realm as vast as this. She inclined her head. Yes, do so. And let's send a message wishing Ser Barristan a swift recovery. The next days brought more letters confirming that Robert had discovered scattered references to a potential plot, a shadowy figure known as the Golden Hand paying mercenaries to harry Westeros shipping. Some suspected it was a Cohoric lord or a Lysine consortium, but the trail was murky. Lyanna sensed in Robert's tone a near glee at the prospect of a bigger conspiracy. He always preferred a real enemy to chase rather than the plotting complexities of politics. The entire matter left an unsettled feeling in the pit of her stomach. When Robert and John Connington finally returned, King's Landing welcomed them with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The battered fleet had lost only a few ships, but the battles had been intense. Barristan Selmy, his arm in a sling, received a hero's welcome. Robert rode through the gate on a magnificent stallion, fresh scars on his forearms and a triumphant grin on his bearded face. The small folk cheered, for they adored a martial hero. Lyanna and Rhaegar stood atop the steps to the Red Keep to greet them, the royal banners hanging on either side. Robert dismounted, bowing exaggeratedly before the king and queen. "Your graces, the Sell sails have been crushed. Their leaders are dead or captured. The narrow sea lanes are safe again, for now." Rhaegar embraced Robert in a comradely fashion, ignoring the Staglord's stiff surprise. "Well done, Lord Baratheon. Your valor is unmatched. We are in your debt." Lyanna inclined her head. "We're glad you've returned safely. And Ser Barristan, thank the gods you survived your wounds. You are a credit to the Kingsguard." Barristan, pale but steadfast, bowed. "The victory belongs to all who fought, your grace." Lord Robert's hammer dealt terrible blows to the enemy fort. Once he broke their line, they had little will to resist. Robert smirked. "They scattered like rabbits. Though we did find a chest of coin in their hold, enough to prove they were financed by wealthy benefactors, but no direct evidence of who they might be. The coins are of Tyroshi mint, though we suspect that might be a ruse." Rhaegar gestured for the group to move inside, away from the gawking crowd. In a private council meeting soon after, they examined the retrieved coins and scraps of correspondence. The parchment was written in a dialect of Low Valyrian, referencing shipments and payments, but it avoided naming names. Varys, summoned to the meeting, fingered the edges of the parchment delicately. His head shaved smooth and his expression neutral. "My little birds have heard rumors in Tyrosh of a mysterious patron who claims ties to old Targaryen exiles," he mused. "But whether it's a genuine descendant of the Blackfires or simply a cunning merchant, I cannot yet say. We'll dig deeper." Robert seemed disappointed that the conspirators hadn't been unmasked more decisively. He let out a frustrated sigh. "We've done what we can on the battlefield. Now it's up to spies and ravens." Rhaegar placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. "Your efforts still safeguarded our trade routes. That's no small feat. The realm owes you gratitude." Lyanna offered Robert a small, encouraging nod. She saw him stiffen, as if unsure how to process the praise. In the end, he looked away. She understood that war was the stage where he felt most alive, while the intricacies of infiltration and cunning plots left him restless. Still, he had accomplished his duty, and the realm was better for it. While the Stepstones affair slowly unraveled in the shadows, life in King's Landing returned to its rhythms. Festivals were held, including a harvest celebration that Rhaegar and Lyanna presided over, ensuring bread and fresh produce were distributed to the poor. Lords came and went with their retinues, seeking favor or bearing gifts. Lyanna watched it all with a critical eye, mindful of how easily old grudges could kindle new flames. A few weeks later, a message arrived from Sunspear. Elia Martell wrote that she had settled comfortably at the Water Gardens, enjoying the mild climate and gentle sea breezes. She expressed her gratitude for the king and queen's compassion, though she also confessed she missed her children. She hoped they would soon visit, especially Rhaenys, who loved the Dornish beaches. Lyanna read the message with relief. Elia sounded genuinely happier, away from the daily reminders of court. The realm might have been uneasy about the arrangement between Rhaegar, Lyanna, and Elia, but it was working better than anyone had expected. As the year wore on, winter's chill slowly descended on the north, though in the capital the change was less severe. Still, traders brought word of deep snows in Winterfell. Lord Rhaegar Stark remained hale, but the harsh climate limited travel. House Stark's interactions with the Southern Throne had slowed to a trickle of ravens carrying updates on the North's vital resources: timber, iron, furs. Lyanna felt pangs of homesickness whenever she thought of Winterfell's gray stone walls and the godwood where she'd once laughed with her brothers. But she knew her place was here, by Rhaegar's side, forging a future for all of Westeros. One morning, her brother Eddard arrived unexpectedly, accompanied by a small retinue of northern guards. She hurried to greet him in the courtyard, her breath misting in the late autumn air. Ned dismounted, dusting snow from his cloak. He wore a simple expression of relief upon seeing his sister. They embraced. She felt the comforting solidity of Ned's presence, so different from the pomp of southern lords. "It's good to see you," she said softly, stepping back to look him over. He seemed older, more somber, though he'd always had that grave aspect to him. "And you, Lya," Ned replied. "I come with tidings from the north. Father grows older. He wishes to ensure succession is in order and to pass on certain responsibilities. Brandon's absence still weighs heavily on him. I thought it best to speak with the king in person." Her chest tightened at the mention of Brandon, their elder brother who had died before her fateful marriage. She forced a small smile. "You'll find Rhaegar in the council chambers. Come, I'll escort you." As they walked through the Red Keep, Ned took in the tapestries and polished floors with a quiet stoicism. He remarked how every time he visited, the castle seemed bigger than before, or maybe he just grew more aware of its complexities. Lyanna sensed his unease but appreciated his willingness to engage in southern politics, for her sake and for the sake of the north. Rhaegar greeted Ned warmly, though a trace of formality lingered. Ned's relationship with the Targaryens had always been complicated by their father's and brother's fate under Aerys. But time had softened the sharpest edges, especially since Rhaegar had deposed Aerys without letting King's Landing burn. Ned recognized the differences between father and son and had chosen to respect Rhaegar's kingship, if not to embrace it wholeheartedly. Ned spoke of Lord Ricard's desire to confirm Eddard as the official warden of the North when the time came. He also relayed concerns about wildlings crossing the wall, forcing the Night's Watch to stretch its patrols thin. Rhaegar listened attentively, promising to dispatch additional resources if necessary. He suggested that, in the spring, he might travel to Winterfell with Lyanna and their son Jon to let the boy experience the North firsthand. Ned welcomed the idea, though he cautioned about traveling in uncertain winter weather. They agreed to plan carefully. Over the next week, Ned remained at court, quietly observing the southern lords. He was laconic in gatherings, but he gave Lyanna a few wry observations, that certain courtiers flattered the king too eagerly or that a particular advisor seemed too close to Tywin Lannister's ear. Lyanna took these observations seriously, adding them to her mental ledger of who stood where in the labyrinth of royal politics. On Ned's last evening in the capital, Lyanna found him alone in a small side garden, gazing at a slender weirwood sapling the crown had planted as a nod to northern customs. The face carved into the sapling's trunk was faint, the bark still young. She approached softly, placing a hand on his arm. "You miss the real Godwood, don't you?" she asked, reading his thoughtful expression. He nodded. "It's strange to see a weirwood so small, but I'm glad the old gods are acknowledged here, even if only in a token way. Times have changed, Lya. The realm is not what it was." She studied the sapling's thin branches, the pale leaves rustling in a breeze. "Times had to change. If Rhaegar hadn't acted, if I hadn't." Ned shook his head gently. "No need to dwell on what might have been. That path was too terrible to imagine. We're here now, and the realm is at peace. I can accept that, even if I'll never love the South the way you do." She smiled softly. "I'm not sure I love the South as much as I accept it's my home now. Part of me still yearns for the North, for the wolves in the forests and the crisp air at dawn. But I have duties here and a family." He gave her a quiet nod. "I understand. Still, Father would be glad to see you if you find the chance." They shared a comfortable silence, each remembering lost faces, Brandon, their mother, the old days at Winterfell. Then Ned sighed and touched the sapling's trunk. "The children keep us looking forward, I suppose. How's Jon faring?" "Growing fast," she replied with a smile. "He trains at arms, studies with the maesters, forms friendships with Aegon and Rhaenys. He's quick, Ned. Sometimes I see the quiet in him that you have, but also a certain intensity from his father." Ned's gaze warmed. "I hope he'll know the North well someday. Perhaps the day you visit will be the first step." They parted under the starlight, a brother and sister bound by memories yet living in separate worlds. When Ned left King's Landing, Lyanna felt that old pang of homesickness, though she was grateful for his visit. As winter deepened, the capital saw occasional frosts but no major snows. Rhaegar and Lyanna continued the daily work of governance, awarding minor lordships, settling trade disputes, receiving envoys from across the sea who assured them no new threats had emerged in the Stepstones. Varys's whisper network fed them tidbits of rumored intrigues, but nothing so pressing as to overshadow the season's quiet. During this lull, Rhaegar proposed they travel briefly to Dragonstone, the ancient Targaryen seat, to inspect the fortress and ensure its readiness for any future conflicts. Lyanna agreed, intrigued to see the place that had once sheltered them after their marriage but had since been neglected in the busy years of ruling from King's Landing. She also thought the island's stark beauty might remind her of northern shores. They left Jon in the care of trusted advisors for a short time. He was old enough to attend to his studies and daily training without them, and they would only be gone a fortnight. The royal galley took them across choppy waters, the wind crisp against their cloaks. Dragonstone loomed on the horizon, a grim fortress of ancient Valyrian design. Its gargoyles perched atop towers, and the basalt walls seemed to drink in the light. Lyanna recalled the first time she had arrived here. She had been newlywed, uncertain of her place, and King Aerys' madness was a rising specter that overshadowed them. Upon disembarking, they were greeted by the Castellan and a handful of Targaryen loyalists who maintained the fortress year-round. The castle's corridors smelled faintly of salt and soot. Lyanna found herself walking old halls that carried echoes of her younger self, listening to Rhaegar's harp under flickering torchlight. There was a strange comfort in seeing how time had changed them both. They inspected the castle's armory, the stockpiles of food, the smithy, and the old Valyrian dragonlore tomes kept in a small library. Rhaegar lingered over certain scrolls, reading them with a solemn fascination. Lyanna read the titles: accounts of the doom of Valyria, theories on dragon breeding, and even records of Targaryen dreams and prophecies. She noticed that Rhaegar's eyes shone with a mix of nostalgia and wistfulness. "You once believed in a great destiny," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Do these scrolls rekindle that old fire?" He exhaled slowly. "They do. Yet my perspective has changed. I once thought being the prince that was promised meant a singular, glorious role. But I see now that leadership is not about one man's legend. It's about guiding a realm through daily hardships, forging alliances, preventing disasters. Perhaps prophecy only points us to the path we must walk. Our real test is how we walk it." She smiled. "We've saved Westeros from a war that might have consumed us all. That's a triumph worth any prophecy." He turned to her. "I'll not deny there may be threats beyond our southern squabbles. The White Walkers are more legend than reality to most, but the Night's Watch ever keeps an eye on the far north. If any great darkness comes, I hope we'll be ready." They left the library and climbed winding steps to the highest tower. There, a wide balcony overlooked the roiling sea. The wind was fierce, snapping at their cloaks. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple, painting the horizon over waters that churned around the volcanic island. Lyanna had to raise her voice against the gusts. "It's beautiful in a harsh way," she shouted. Rhaegar nodded, stepping closer so their shoulders touched. "Yes, Dragonstone is a place of old power, but it also reminds me how fragile we are. Storms can batter these walls. The waves never tire. Just like the realm, always shifting, always testing its rulers." He slipped his arm around her waist. Together, they watched the sun sink below the sea, leaving a trail of fire on the water's surface. Lyanna felt the pounding of her heart steady, as though in rhythm with the crashing waves. Here, in this moment, they were not just king and queen, but two people bound by love and ambition, forging a future they both believed in. They lingered on Dragonstone a few more days, meeting with local fishermen, hearing their concerns about taxes and trade. Rhaegar placed a new harbor official in charge, someone he trusted to ensure fairness. Lyanna chatted with the wives and daughters of minor knights who guarded the fortress. She sensed their pride in living on such storied ground, along with their occasional loneliness, cut off from the bustle of the mainland. When they returned to King's Landing, letters awaited them, one from Dorne stating that Elia might visit in the new year, bringing with her a retinue of Dornish lords who wished to renew their oaths of fealty. Another was from Tywin Lannister, referencing financial matters and politely suggesting the crown should repay certain loans to House Lannister to strengthen the realm's credit. Yet another letter arrived from the Iron Islands. Lord Balon Greyjoy invited the king to attend a gathering on Pike, a curious gesture. Lyanna and Rhaegar exchanged puzzled looks. Rarely did the Ironborn show hospitality to Targaryen monarchs. A suspicion arose that Balon simply wanted to display his fleets and prove how formidable they were. Perhaps he was testing the waters for rebellious ambitions. They decided to respond politely but with no commitment to attend. Life pressed onward. Lyanna found happiness in daily tasks and cherished each moment with Jon, who now bested some of his peers in sword practice. She also saw Aegon blossoming into a thoughtful boy often found in the library, devouring books of chivalry and history, while Rhaenys took to music and dance with a grace that reminded Lyanna of Rhaegar's own gentle artistry. The children, so different yet so alike, were living proof that houses could blend, that the realm's old rifts could heal. One evening, as the snows of winter parted for a brief mild spell, a hush fell over King's Landing. Lyanna stood on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, a single torch in her hand, watching as a scattered flurry drifted from the sky. It melted as it touched the warm stones, and the flickering torchlight cast golden motes in the air. She heard footsteps behind her. Rhaegar appeared, wrapping a cloak around her shoulders. She tilted her head back, letting a snowflake land on her face. It's almost comical how excited some in the capital get over a dusting of snow. He chuckled. They're not used to it. You, of course, would probably ride through a blizzard for sport. She laughed softly. I might. Then she grew quiet, her eyes distant. Sometimes I think of how differently this could have all ended. If you hadn't crowned me at Harrenhal. If I'd gone back to the north, pledged to Robert. If Aerys had not been deposed. It's like looking at a chasm we narrowly leapt across. He slid his arms around her. And we made it to the other side. Perhaps that's the heart of it. We dared, and the realm followed. She nodded, pressing her cheek to his chest. It's not perfect, but it's better than war. They stood there a while, letting the snow swirl around them, reflecting on everything they'd built. In the distant alleyways, they heard the faint laughter of children discovering their first taste of winter. The castle gates were shut to keep the nights cold at bay. Inside these walls, a tapestry of alliances, loyalties, and renewed friendships was being woven day by day, each thread a testament to how drastically the realm had changed since the wedding at Harrenhal. Soon, a new year dawned. The great hall was adorned in banners for a celebration of the Seven, to welcome the new year with prayers for prosperity. Nobles packed the city, swelling the taverns and inns. Lyanna oversaw a distribution of bread and salted fish to the poor. Rest quarters ensuring no one went hungry during the festivities. Rhaegar presided over a solemn ceremony in the royal sept, inviting the High Septon to bless the realm. Lyanna attended, though she also privately visited the small godwood within the Red Keep, kneeling by the young weirwood sapling, reminding herself of her northern roots. Elia Martell arrived from Dorne with a small entourage, including Doran Martell, who walked with a measured grace despite the gout in his legs. They brought fresh citrus and Dornish wine as gifts for the royal table. Lyanna welcomed them personally. She noticed Elia's improved health, her cheeks rosier, her demeanor more relaxed. Rhaenys and Aegon ran to embrace their mother, joyful to see her. There was no tension in the courtyard as the greetings were exchanged, only a sense of well-worn familiarity. During a feast that night, Elia sat near Lyanna, the two women exchanging pleasantries about court life and the children's growth. Across from them, Doran Martell conversed with Tywin Lannister, an unlikely pairing that showcased how much the realm had shifted from old grudges. Rhaegar, at the head of the table, spoke quietly with Jon Arryn about the year's plans. The great hall glowed with torchlight, the music of strings and flutes drifting through the air. Elia turned to Lyanna, voice low enough not to be overheard. It's odd how time can heal some wounds. Sometimes, when I see you and Rhaegar, I think of the life we had, he and I, but it feels distant, like someone else's dream. Lyanna reached for her goblet, taking a measured sip of Dornish wine. I can't imagine how difficult it's been for you, but I hope we've at least found a way to be at peace. For the children's sake, if nothing else. Elia offered a soft, sad smile. I've found a sort of acceptance. You've treated me with more kindness than many in your position would. And Rhaegar has never turned his back on Aegon and Rhaenys. Dorne remains loyal. It's more than I could have expected back when King Aerys still held power. Lyanna placed a hand over Elias gently. I'm grateful. Truly. I know this realm is not easy for any of us. Elia squeezed her hand, then released it. They turned their attention back to the broader conversation, but a sense of closeness lingered. The realm saw two women bridging a divide that once threatened to crack the foundations of royal power. In many ways, that moment epitomized the new era. Once bitter lines of separation were being softened, one small gesture at a time. As the feast concluded, Rhaegar stood to address the assembled lords and ladies. The music paused. Dozens of eyes turned to him. He spoke of the new year, the continuing aim of peace, the importance of unity. He spoke of future alliances, of the harvest, of the need to remain vigilant against threats both within and beyond Westeros. He looked at Robert Baratheon, who was present and, for once, sober, and acknowledged the valiancy shown in the Stepstones. He praised Dorne for their steadfast loyalty. He thanked the North for sending men when needed, and the Vale for always supporting stability. He singled out the Iron Islands only briefly, praising them for cooperating in trade, a subtle nudge to encourage them to keep the peace. Lastly, he placed a hand on Lyanna's shoulder, turning toward her. The crowd hushed even further. "And to my queen," Rhaegar said softly, voice carrying warmth, "whose counsel, courage, and resolve have guided me through every storm since the day we wed. May the union of the dragon and the wolf continue to serve as the realm's bedrock." A light applause rose, but in it there was genuine affection rather than forced courtly manners. Lyanna felt her cheeks flush, though she nodded graciously to the gathered lords and ladies. She had never sought the limelight, yet she found solace in the knowledge that together, she and Rhaegar had steered Westeros away from the brink of ruin. The evening ended on a high note, with courtiers drifting off to their chambers, the corridors alive with whispers of hope for the year ahead. In the days following, a flurry of visitors departed King's Landing, returning to their respective domains. Elia, too, began preparations to head back to Dorne, leaving Aegon and Rhaenys in the care of their tutors and guardians at court. Lyanna embraced her on the morning she left. Their farewell was not tearful, only a calm acknowledgement of each other's place in this intertwined family. Robert Baratheon stayed a bit longer, engaged in small council meetings about reinforcing certain border garrisons, but he eventually took his leave. Before he left, he sought a private audience with Rhaegar and Lyanna together. It occurred in the same solar where so many important discussions had been held. He informed them that he wished to marry at last. "I'm looking to wed Cersei Lannister," he said, his tone somewhat gruff, as though unsure how they would react. "Tywin's daughter. She's comely, and House Lannister is wealthy. It'd be a strong alliance for the Stormlands." Lyanna flicked her gaze to Rhaegar, recalling the rumors that Tywin had once wanted Cersei betrothed to Rhaegar himself, back when King Aerys refused. Now the Lannisters saw a chance to tie themselves to the Baratheons, ensuring a powerful bloc in the realm. Rhaegar offered a measured nod. "That could be beneficial indeed, Robert, if that is what you both desire." Robert shrugged, looking vaguely uncomfortable. "She's beautiful and I'm not a man for fancy words. I'll make her a good husband, and she'll bring me fine heirs. I'm done wandering, done pining for things that can't be mine. Time to be practical." Lyanna swallowed a small knot of emotion. She heard in his voice the final acceptance that he and she were not destined to be. She stood, crossing to him. He stiffened but didn't pull away. Gently, she placed a hand on his arm. "Congratulations. May it bring you happiness." He looked at her, something unspoken passing in his eyes, then nodded briefly. "I'll send an invitation to the wedding once we set a date." They parted perhaps more amicably than they ever had. Lyanna watched him go with a faint sadness tempered by relief. Robert was forging a new path. Let him find contentment with Cersei Lannister, though Lyanna privately hoped that union would not spark new ambitions in House Lannister that could destabilize the realm. Still, maybe this was the final step in Robert's acceptance. The ghost of their old betrothal would now lie peacefully in its grave. Seasons shifted. Snows fell thicker in the north, but in King's Landing the winter came gently with only scattered frosts. The realm seemed to rest, gathering its strength for whatever might come next. Lyanna noticed a subtle change in Rhaegar. He was more at ease, as though the major threats had passed. Yet part of her remained watchful, mindful that old resentments did not simply vanish, they only lay dormant. At times, she walked through the Red Keep, remembering the day the High Septon had pronounced her Rhaegar's wife beneath the weirwood at Harrenhal, how it had ignited shockwaves across the Seven Kingdoms. She recalled her father's guarded blessing and the swirling rumors that had led to a grand council deposing King Aerys. Their union had not only changed their own lives but reshaped history. One evening, Rhaegar found her reading an old account of the tourney at Harrenhal penned by a maester who had been present. He slipped into the seat beside her and traced his fingertips along the page. The text described the moment he placed the crown of winter roses in her lap, calling her the queen of love and beauty, and how the crowd had gasped in astonishment. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't done that," he murmured. She smiled ruefully. "Perhaps Robert and I would have wed. Perhaps you would have continued in your father's shadow, hoping for change that never came until it was too late." He nodded, his violet eyes distant. "I never planned that day with cunning. Something in me just knew. I saw you, proud and fierce, unbowed by the pomp around you. And I realized I could not live with the realm's old patterns." She closed the book gently. "The realm changed because we dared break those patterns. And we're still here, still standing." Their hands found each other, fingers entwining as they often did in quiet moments. Outside, a slow wind rattled the shutters. The castle seemed at peace. Their hearts, once battered by prophecy and intrigue, had found a steady rhythm. In that hush, Lyanna felt the weight of everything they'd overcome: Ares's madness, Robert's fury, the realm's suspicions, and saw in Rhaegar's eyes that same mixture of resolve and gentle warmth that had first captured her heart. So long as they held each other, the storms that loomed on the horizon seemed manageable. The months stretched into years, weaving a tapestry of small triumphs and occasional setbacks. Rhaegar's hair, once purely silver gold, developed faint threads of white, and Lyanna discovered a few silver strands in her own dark locks. Jon sprouted like a sapling, as did Aegon and Rhaenys. The children learned courtly manners, swordsmanship, histories, and occasionally snuck off to the library or the training yard for mischief. Elia visited from Dorne more regularly, her relationship with Lyanna evolving into one of companionable understanding. Robert married Cersei Lannister in a lavish ceremony at Storm's End, and though Lyanna and Rhaegar could not attend in person due to pressing matters in the capital, they sent generous gifts and warm congratulations. Rumors soon reached them that Robert and Cersei's marriage was rocky. Robert drank heavily, haunted by regrets, and Cersei had her own ambitions. Still, that was a matter for House Baratheon and House Lannister to navigate, at least until it threatened the broader realm. Through it all, the union of fire and ice, of Targaryen and Stark, remained the cornerstone of the realm's stability. Rhaegar's cautious reforms, Lyanna's direct empathy, Jon Arryn's wisdom, Tywin Lannister's administrative might, and the guarded cooperation of lords like Robert and Dor and Martell all forged a precarious balance. The small folk, for the most part, were spared the horrors of rebellion. Trade flourished, roads improved, and the night sky over King's Landing was no longer haunted by the specter of wildfire. That is not to say everything was idyllic. Border skirmishes flared, local feuds bubbled up, and the Iron Throne still carried the weight of thousands of secrets. But it was a peace built on compromise rather than conquest, a testament to how drastically a single choice, Rhaegar's public crowning of Lyanna at Harrenhal, could alter the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. Years later, as Jon reached manhood and prepared for his first experience of the North, Lyanna stood on the walls of the Red Keep, remembering the path she had walked to get here. Rhaegar joined her, their cloaks billowing in a spring breeze. The city glittered below, and beyond its walls lay a realm that had healed more than it had bled. Somewhere in the swirl of gulls that wheeled above Blackwater Bay, she thought of the old dream that she might ride away from all constraints. Yet she realized that being queen had liberated her in a different way. She was no puppet, no captive bride. She had shaped a kingdom. Rhaegar's hand found hers. She squeezed it, her gaze traveling over the sprawl of King's Landing, beyond the plains to the faint line of the horizon where the King's Road stretched north. If there was any prophecy at all, it was that love and determination, joined together, could overcome ancient grudges and shape a better age. They had proven it true. And though the future remained unwritten, full of lurking perils and undiscovered hopes, she felt certain that together, the dragon and the wolf would continue to guide Westeros through the shifting tides of fate, forging their own legends in place of the ones that had nearly consumed them all. Time moved in slow, inexorable cycles at the Red Keep. Days bled into nights, seasons faded into one another, and the realm lived beneath a cautious peace. Yet beneath that surface calm, currents of ambition still churned among lords and ladies, ever eager to seize the advantage if weaknesses were to appear. Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, king and queen, carried the weight of those undercurrents with each dawn that brought new challenges. Jon, their son, approached his 16th name day, and with his growth came the realm's curiosity. Which path would the young prince walk? Would he be more wolf than dragon, or weave some new legacy entirely? Already, his quiet determination reminded many of Ned Stark's steady hand, while a certain thoughtful cast of mind recalled Rhaegar's own childhood. At the same time, Aegon and Rhaenys, children of Elia Martell and Rhaegar, were forging their own identities within court life, equally vital to the Targaryen future. Aegon had developed a keen interest in history and statecraft, often seen with an ancient tome beneath his arm, while Rhaenys shone in the arts, her poised courtesy the delight of visiting lords. As the children grew, so did the complexities of alliance-making. Advisors had begun to whisper about betrothals. A new generation of noble heirs filled the capital at intervals. Lannisters, Arryns, Tullys, Tyrells, Baratheons. Some attended court for a season to learn the ways of governance or secure the king's favor. Others came simply to display their finery and test the waters for advantageous matches. Lyanna noted the blossoming young ladies from various houses eyeing her son Jon with undisguised curiosity. They admired his dark hair and reserved manner, murmuring that he was a wolf prince with Targaryen blood. Yet she and Rhaegar hesitated to push him toward any formal betrothal. Let him grow at his own pace, discover who he wished to be. One crisp morning, a raven arrived from the Iron Islands. It carried summons from Lord Balon Greyjoy, reaffirming an invitation he had extended a year prior. A grand gathering on Pike to present the Ironborn's seafaring might, with the implication that the king himself would be an honored guest. Balon's letter was phrased in a respectful but calculating tone, boasting of new ships under construction, new docks, a new prosperity. He suggested that the Ironborn desired closer ties to the crown. Yet anyone who knew the Iron Islands suspected deeper motives. In the council chamber, Rhaegar read the letter aloud, the hush broken by the rustle of parchment. Lyanna, seated at his right, observed the reactions of those around the table. Jon Arryn remained impassive, fingers steepled, while Tywin Lannister, though his gaze flickered, kept his features schooled. Robert Baratheon was not present, having returned to Storm's End to handle unrest among some of his vassals. Otherwise, he would likely have dismissed the Ironborn invitation as an audacious ruse. Rhaegar lowered the letter. Lord Greyjoy insists we see how the Iron Islands have thrived under his rule, thanks to our peaceful era. He claims a willingness to increase tribute to the crown. Yet we all know the Ironborn are not easily content with a soft hand. What say you all? Jon Arryn cleared his throat. Lord Balon has never been close to the throne. His father and grandfather before him often tested royal authority. Might this be a play for recognition? If he can parade his ships and wealth before your grace, perhaps he hopes to negotiate fewer restrictions on their raiding or fishing boundaries. Tywin Lannister nodded. Undoubtedly, Lord Balon aims to extract privileges. Or, at the very least, to glean how much he can push the crown. He may attempt to glean your vulnerabilities. The Ironborn would not bother with a show of hospitality for its own sake. Rhaegar looked to Lyanna. She remembered the old stories of the Ironborn's brutality. Her father, Rickard Stark, had once mentioned how the North seldom forgot raids that came across the sea, plundering coastal villages. If we refuse the invitation, she said slowly, it might inflame tensions and make them bolder in defiance. If we accept, we walk into Balon's territory, giving him a chance to boast or perhaps entrap us in subtle demands. Neither path is risk-free. Rhaegar tapped his fingertips on the table's edge. I prefer to keep lines of communication open. We cannot govern by ignoring entire regions. I'll send a reply stating our interest in visiting, but on our terms. We'll bring a modest royal entourage for safety. If Balon truly seeks friendship, we'll see it with our own eyes. The council debated the logistics, which knights, which ships, how many guards. In the end, it was decided Rhaegar would sail with a small but elite retinue, enough to show the crown's dignity without appearing weak. Lyanna volunteered to join him, though Rhaegar at first hesitated, worried about the potential dangers. You are my queen, he said softly when they were alone. But the Iron Islands can be treacherous. If anything were to happen, she touched his shoulder, a small, confident smile on her lips. We've faced worse dangers before. I will not cower from any corner of our kingdom. We do this together. So preparations began. Jon, Aegon, and Rhaenys would remain in the capital, entrusted to the care of Ser Barristan Selmy and Ser Jaime Lannister, along with a cadre of tutors and advisors. Elia Martell, presently in King's Landing, would also keep watch. The realm's business would not halt simply because the king and queen went voyaging. With a flurry of final instructions, Rhaegar and Lyanna boarded their royal galley a fortnight later, accompanied by several crowned war galleys flying Targaryen banners. A biting wind greeted them on the waters of the Sunset Sea once they rounded Dorne's southwestern coast and then sailed north, the journey a mix of rough waves and fleeting glimpses of rocky shore. The Iron Islands came into view on the dawn of a stormy day, their crags jutting from the sea like jagged teeth. Pike itself was perched on rocky pillars connected by swaying bridges, the fortress battered by ocean spray. The gloom of overcast clouds set the tone for the place, stark, forbidding, full of old power. Longships painted with stylized krakens bobbed in the cold water. Lyanna stood by Rhaegar's side as they neared the docks, recalling the stories of Ironborn raids that had ravaged northern coasts. She felt a prickle of ancestral anger on behalf of House Stark, but she tamped it down. They were here under the banner of peace. On the quays, a collection of Ironborn warriors stood waiting, many wearing boiled leather or ringmail dyed black. In the lead was Balon Greyjoy himself, tall and lean, long black hair streaked with gray. His sons, Roderick and Meryn, flanked him in lesser finery. Balon stepped forward, inclining his head as the king and queen disembarked. A biting wind snatched at Lyanna's cloak, tangling her dark hair around her face. "Your graces," Balon said with a gravelly voice, "the Iron Islands bids you welcome. May our salt and stone prove worthy of your presence." Rhaegar responded with the courtesy that had become his hallmark. "Lord Balon, we thank you for your invitation. We come in good faith, eager to see how the islands have prospered." Balon's mouth twitched. Perhaps he recognized the undercurrent of subtle challenge in the king's tone. "Prosper, indeed. In these peaceful times, we've built new ships and expanded trade. We trade with Lannisport, Old Town, even as far as the Arbor. Let me show you the might of the Ironborn's modern day, no longer reliant on reckless reaving." "We dapt." Lyanna dipped her head in acknowledgement, her mind churning. She saw Balon's pride, but also glimpsed a flicker of guarded ambition in his eyes. The small retinue from the royal ships formed a respectful column behind Rhaegar and Lyanna, swords at their sides, wearing the dragon sigil. They followed Balon across a narrow stone causeway that led to Pike's main gate. Waves crashed on the rocks below, sending up salt spray that clung to everyone's cloaks. Within Pike's inner keep, the halls were dimly lit by torches. Servants offered cups of dark ale and salted fish. The castle exuded an air of bleakness, from the black basalt walls to the damp smell that lingered. Lyanna recalled how different it was from the warmth of Winterfell's halls or even the austere dryness of the Red Keep. Still, she schooled her face to calm courtesy, letting Balon lead them to a broad chamber set with a rough-hewn table. Once seated, conversation began. Balon boasted of new harbors, rodnet fisheries that brought in greater catches, and alliances with certain merchants from the Westerlands. Lyanna listened carefully for hints of underlying tension. Rhaegar asked measured questions about the volume of trade, about the Ironborn's longships. Balon's sons watched like hawks, occasionally interjecting about how the old ways of reaving had given way to enterprise. Yet their proud smirks made Lyanna wonder if they believed a word of it themselves. After the meal, Balon invited them to a tour of the fortress. The group walked narrow corridors that opened onto precarious bridges linking different spires of Pike. The wind tugged relentlessly. One misstep could send a person plunging into the raging sea. Along the way, Rhaegar paused at a carved iron kraken mounted on a door. "Your sigil," he mused. "It has a certain grim magnificence." Balon inclined his head. "We Greyjoys take pride in what we are, Your Grace. The sea is our mother, and iron is our father. We do not fear storms or the wrath of lesser men." Lyanna arched a brow but kept silent. Balon's words sounded like a quiet challenge. She wondered if he was testing the king's patience. Rhaegar only offered a faint smile. "Yet we all share the same realm, do we not? The waves of the Sunset Sea do not keep you from the Iron Throne's sight." That night, a feast was held in the Great Hall of Pike, which was smaller and gloomier than most lords' grand halls, but still managed a raw splendor. Pine torches flickered, casting shadows along the stone walls. A salt-stained banner depicting the kraken draped behind Balon's seat. The fare was hearty. Roasted fish, mussels in a pungent broth, black bread, strong ale. The Ironborn lords in attendance eyed Rhaegar and Lyanna with a mix of respect and curiosity. At one point, Balon rose, lifting his cup to propose a toast to the king who has kept peace and allowed our isles to flourish. Rhaegar responded by acknowledging that the Iron Islands were integral to Westeros. Though the old days of Iron-born raids had brought sorrow, a new era might cement them as valued trading partners. Toasts were made, but the mood felt taut, as though one side or the other might break the veneer of civility if given the slightest excuse. During the feast, Balon's eldest son, Roderick Greyjoy, mustered the courage to address Lyanna. He was a stout young man, perhaps in his early 20s, with a short black beard. "Your Grace," he said, dipping his head, "I've heard tales of your northern roots. The North knows the sea in its own way, yet not quite like the Iron Islands. How do you find Pike's shores?" Lyanna considered her words. "Harsh, yet oddly captivating. I was raised in Winterfell, where the land can be as unforgiving as the cold sea. Strength is often forged in the face of hardship." Roderick nodded, spoken like one who understands. "My father believes in forging alliances through strength. These times of peace are well enough, but we must never forget the old ways that made us Ironborn." She let a small pause hang in the air. "And do you personally wish for the old ways to return? Raiding? Reaving? Taking what you will by force?" He glanced around, lowering his voice. "I serve my father's vision, of course. Yet some among us question whether we should remain so compliant under the Iron Throne. We are Ironborn, not harvesters or tavern keepers." Lyanna's heart thudded, but she kept her tone calm. "This realm has endured centuries of war. Your father extended this invitation in good faith, surely not to question the authority of the crown." Roderick's eyes flickered with something like frustration. "We are proud, Your Grace. If we are forced to yield the pride, what is left of us?" She offered a neutral smile. "Pride can be tempered by wisdom. It needn't be lost." He bowed slightly and excused himself. Lyanna mulled his words. Pride, the seed of many rebellions. Perhaps Balon's younger generation yearned for greater independence or a return to Ironborn raids that were once the terror of the western coast. If that hunger simmered, it might erupt in open defiance down the line. By the following morning, Rhaegar and Lyanna prepared to sail back, satisfied that they had at least seen the Iron Islands with their own eyes. Balon escorted them to the docks, unveiling a line of newly built longships with black sails. Each prow was carved into a grim kraken visage. "Our new fleet," Balon announced, arms spread wide. "We intend to protect our trade routes and respond to any threat from beyond our shores." Rhaegar's gaze scanned the row of ships, the slender hulls built for swift raids or defense. "A formidable force. May it serve the realm's interests and not be turned against it." Balon gave a thin smile. "We serve the realm so long as the realm respects us." No outright challenge, yet the words hinted at conditions. Lyanna watched Rhaegar keep his face impassive. Their goodbyes were curt. The Targaryen galley departed under a grim sky, with the Ironborn's farewell horns echoing across the waves. Lyanna stood on deck, arms folded against the wind. She felt unsettled, suspecting that Balon's outward courtesy masked deeper ambitions. Rhaegar joined her at the rail, silent for a time. "Are you thinking of Roderick's words?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Roderick, Balon. They seem proud of their new prosperity, but I sense an undercurrent of dissatisfaction, like they're biding time. The Iron Islands are not used to subservience. If their fortunes wane, or if the realm shows weakness, they may try to break away in force." Lyanna let out a quiet breath. "We'll be ready if that day comes. Still, I hope they find reason to remain loyal. Another war would cost too much blood." They spoke little else on the return voyage. Rain lashed the decks, and the crew remained alert for sudden squalls. At last, they reached King's Landing, where a gentler climate greeted them. The capital's walls and towers were a comforting sight. Word had traveled fast, and courtiers buzzed with questions about the Iron Islands. Rhaegar, mindful of the risk, reported to the small council that the meeting was cordial but ominous. He instructed Lord Varys to keep ears open for any sign of Ironborn restlessness. Tywin Lannister quietly nodded, as if he had already predicted as much. Jon Arryn concurred that vigilance was necessary. Amid these concerns, life pressed on. Elia Martell, visiting once again, planned a trip to the Water Gardens for the summer, inviting Rhaenys to accompany her. Aegon, now a serious young man of 18, began assisting the scribes in the royal library, poring over genealogies and records of old disputes. Rhaegar teased that his scholarly bent might lead him to be a future Grand Maester rather than a prince. Meanwhile, Jon, just turned 16, trained with the King's Guard and participated in small court sessions to learn the intricacies of law. Lyanna found herself marveling at how tall he had grown, with broad shoulders hinting at a warrior's build, though his face still bore a shadow of that earnest boyishness. One late afternoon, she discovered him at practice in the yard, sparring with a seasoned knight named Ser Rabar Royce. Jon's expression was intense, sweat darkening his brow. He moved with a fluidity that belied his large frame, swinging his blade in controlled arcs. Rhaegar parried, offering hushed instructions as steel rang against steel. Lyanna stood quietly, recalling the many days she had trained with wooden swords in Winterfell's courtyard, defying convention. Jon was further along than she had ever been at that age. She felt a twinge of pride. After a few more exchanges, Rhaegar saluted and withdrew, giving a short bow to Lyanna. Jon turned, chest heaving, noticing his mother. He sheathed his sword and approached, wiping sweat from his forehead with his forearm. "You look fierce," Lyanna remarked with a small smile. "I pity the foe who stands against you." Jon gave a self-conscious shrug. "Rhaegar says I'm improving, but my technique needs refinement. I rely too much on speed. He wants me to practice more grappling for close quarters." Lyanna remembered how Ned had always preached the importance of fundamentals. "Keep working. The sword is only one part of a warrior's skill. Tactics, observation, those matter too." He nodded, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Mother, do you think? Are there any real prospects of war soon? Some of the knights talk about tensions with the Iron Islands, rumors from the Stepstones. It seems the realm is never truly at rest." She studied him, sensing the mix of excitement and apprehension in his voice. He was of an age to yearn for glory yet fear the bloodshed that came with it. "We do our best to keep the peace, Jon, but you're right that uneasy times linger. If you prepare, then at least you won't be caught off guard if the worst happens." He exhaled, gaze dropping to the yard's gravel. "I don't seek war, but if it comes, I won't hesitate. I'll stand with Father, with you, with all of us." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, my son, and we'll stand with you." In the following weeks, a new swirl of gossip colored the court, the question of marriage alliances for the royal heirs. Aegon, nearing his 19th name day, drew the interest of several houses. Tywin Lannister discreetly hinted that a potential match with one of his younger nieces could strengthen ties to House Lannister. The Tyrells had also let slip that they would welcome an alliance, offering the hand of Margaery Tyrell, a bright girl a few years younger than Aegon. Meanwhile, suitors for Rhaenys came from the Stormlands and even across the sea in Volantis, where a wealthy triarch had an ambitious nephew. As for Jon, letters from the north suggested potential matches among the daughters of various northern lords. Yet no formal proposals were on the table. Rhaegar and Lyanna found themselves in the delicate position of balancing the realm's stability with the children's own wishes. One morning, Lyanna walked with Aegon through the Red Keep's gardens, a tranquil place of trimmed hedges and lemon trees. He wore a simple doublet, carrying a book about the Seven's legal codes. Tall and slender, he had a thoughtful air, with Rhaegar's silver hair cropped shorter than was fashionable. He glanced around, ensuring no one else was within earshot. "Your Grace, may I ask something personal?" Lyanna nodded, gently waving off the formality. "Of course, Aegon. You needn't call me Your Grace in private." He offered a faint smile. "I've been hearing about possible betrothals. My father tries to keep me informed, but I sense he also wants my own feelings. Yet I'm uncertain. Marriage as a political tool is so new to me. I don't wish to offend any great house, but I wonder if it's truly my duty to marry someone I hardly know." Lyanna clasped her hands behind her back, walking slowly beside him. "You're not wrong that it's complicated. Royal children often marry for alliances. In many ways, it helps maintain the peace. But your father and I believe in considering personal happiness too. We had that chance ourselves, even if it came at great risk. We'd not want you or your sister forced into an unhappy union." He bowed his head, relief flickering in his eyes. "Thank you. I've always respected you for that choice, marrying for love. I know it shaped everything." Lyanna thought back to that day at Harrenhal, the tension in the air, the stolen glances with Rhaegar, the hush of the crowd as he placed the crown of winter roses on her lap. Yes, it changed the course of Westeros. But it wasn't a simple choice. It brought conflict before it brought peace. If there's a match that suits you both personally and politically, that'd be ideal. Don't rush. Let your father handle the more pressing negotiations, and we'll see if a suitable bride emerges who resonates with you. He exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. "I appreciate that. I'll keep an open mind. Perhaps I should visit Highgarden or Casterly Rock, meet these ladies in person." "That's a fine idea," Lyanna said. "Your father or Jon Arryn can arrange a courtesy visit, nothing binding. Just to see if you feel comfortable." They spoke a while longer about the intricacies of courtship, about how alliances shape the realm, and about Aegon's personal ambitions. He confessed he sometimes imagined studying more deeply, perhaps traveling to Old Town to learn from the great maesters, though he knew duty called him to remain near the seat of power. When Lyanna left him, she felt a swell of affection for this gentle, contemplative young man who stood at the threshold of adult responsibilities. Not long after, Rhaenys approached Lyanna with a similar quandary. She had no shortage of suitors, but she seemed uncertain whether she wished to wed at all. At only 16, she found the idea of marriage stifling, longing instead to explore Westeros, visit Dorne, and sharpen her talents for dance and song. Lyanna offered reassurance, telling her that no one at court was pressing immediate marriage. "You have the luxury of time," Lyanna reminded her. "Use it wisely." Rhaenys, graceful and self-possessed, smiled her gratitude. Jon, in contrast, heard fewer direct rumors of marriage. After all, he stood behind Aegon in the line of succession, though some courtiers whispered about the complexities of that line, which child truly held priority. But the possibility of forging ties to the north enticed many. More than one northern house would have welcomed a match that joined Stark and Targaryen lines anew. Lyanna remained watchful, mindful that her son might one day be used as a pawn if not carefully protected. Rhaegar had recognized Jon as a prince of the blood, but also a Stark by heritage, bridging two worlds. That duality could be both a strength and a threat. Through all these personal matters, the day-to-day rulings pressed on. Disputes flared between the Riverlands and the Vale over trade routes. The Master of Coin reported minor shortfalls, prompting Tywin Lannister to suggest new tariffs on certain luxuries. Rhaegar balanced each issue with methodical patience, though the toll of responsibility etched lines at his eyes. Lyanna supported him in both public audiences and private counsel, sometimes offering a direct approach that cut through layers of politicking. As the year wore on, tension brewed from an unexpected quarter, the mountain clans near the Vale. Ravaged by a harsh season, several clans had descended from high passes in search of resources, raiding small villages within the Vale's domain. Jon Arryn requested aid. Though these clans were not numerous enough to threaten the entire kingdom, their raids unsettled lords across the Vale who demanded a firm response. Rhaegar dispatched a contingent of Crownlanders and knights from King's Landing to assist in quelling the raids without wholesale slaughter. Under Ser Brynden Tully's command, famously called the Blackfish, they negotiated with some clan elders, persuading them to accept a supply of grain in exchange for peace. Others refused, leading to skirmishes. The tension eased after a few months, but it was a reminder that no corner of the realm was truly free from conflict. By early autumn, Lyanna found her thoughts turning to the north again. Raven reports from Ned Stark suggested Winterfell had endured a mild harvest season, though the chill came earlier there. Lord Ricard's health was declining, prompting rumors that Ned's formal elevation to Lord of Winterfell might be imminent. Lyanna felt the pull of home, a longing to see the ancient godwood, the frosty hills, the crypts beneath the castle where her ancestors lay. She spoke to Rhaegar about possibly visiting Winterfell before the snows deepened. He agreed on one condition, that he accompany her. "We'll bring Jon too," Rhaegar said. "He should know his northern kin. Let him walk the halls of Winterfell, see the land of his mother's house." With that decided, they arranged for a royal progress of sorts, modest in size so as not to burden the north with an unwieldy retinue, but grand enough to ensure safe passage through the Crownlands and the Riverlands. The plan was to spend a few weeks in Winterfell, returning before winter's teeth truly bit deep. Word spread and excitement stirred in the north. A Targaryen king visiting Winterfell was still a novelty, though Rhaegar had done so once before in the earlier years of his reign. Now, with Jon older, it held deeper meaning. And for Lyanna, it was a chance to show her son the land that shaped her youth and the family that remained dear to her heart. She also found herself eagerly anticipating seeing Ned again, hugging him under Winterfell's high walls, and perhaps bridging the gap of time and distance that had kept them apart for so long. They set out in late autumn, traveling first by road to Harrenhal. The monstrous castle still loomed, a testament to the folly of Harren the Black and the dragons that had melted those towering walls generations ago. Passing by it brought memories rushing back to Lyanna. The grand tourney where Rhaegar had crowned her queen of love and beauty. She gazed on the scorched towers, recalling the hush of that fateful moment. Now, Harrenhal belonged to House Went, though parts of the structure were too large and ruinous to maintain. The travelers rested one night there, dining in a smaller hall maintained for visiting lords. The next morning, a drizzle accompanied them northward, past the wide waters of the God's Eye. They continued through the Riverlands, the roads turning muddy with rain. Lord Hoster Tully had sent word that he would greet them at Riverrun if they wished to stop, but Rhaegar pressed on, not wanting to delay the journey. He gave his courtiers leave to rest at local inns, encouraging the smaller retinue to spread out so as not to tax any single village's hospitality. The local folk were curious, sometimes lining the roads to watch the king's party pass. Some recognized Lyanna's stark features, whispering that the Wolf Queen was returning to her homeland. As they crossed the neck, the air grew damp and chill. Boggy ground, stunted trees, twisting causeways, a region notoriously difficult to traverse. Roose Bolton, the lord of the Dreadfort, sent men to guide them through safer paths, a gesture of uneasy courtesy. Lyanna observed Bolton's men with guarded caution, recalling that House Bolton had a fearsome reputation. Still, they seemed loyal enough, ensuring the king's safety in the treacherous wetlands. Soon, the land began to rise, the temperature dropping further. Jon rode near his mother, marveling at how different it looked from the southern landscapes he knew. Then came the day when Winterfell's granite walls appeared on the horizon. Smoke curled from the great chimneys, warming the fortress. Lyanna breathed in the crisp air, a swirl of memories colliding in her mind. She recalled chasing Ned and Ben-Jen in the courtyard, her father's stern yet affectionate words, the echoes of Brandon's laughter. Now she returned as a queen with Rhaegar Targaryen at her side, their son in tow. Time had cast everything in a new light. The gates opened wide. Ned Stark and a company of Stark bannermen waited in the courtyard, banners of the dire wolf flapping. Behind Ned stood a host of familiar faces, men and women of the north who had known Lyanna in her youth. She saw the lines in Ned's face, deeper than before, and recognized the weight of stewardship. Lord Rhaegar was nowhere to be seen, likely confined indoors by frailty. Ned stepped forward, gave Rhaegar a formal bow, then turned to Lyanna. She needed no decorum. She dismounted and embraced him fiercely, ignoring the stares of courtiers. He hugged her back, murmuring, "Welcome home, Lya." She drew back, presenting Jon, who swung down from his horse. A hint of nerves flickered in the young prince's eyes. Ned studied him, then laid a hand on his shoulder. "You've grown into a fine young man, Jon." Jon managed a respectful bow. "Uncle Ned." Rhaegar dismounted with dignity, nodding to Ned. "Lord Stark, we thank you for hosting us. I trust Lord Rhaegar fares as well as can be expected." Ned's face grew more solemn. He's resting in his solar. Age weighs heavily upon him, but he insisted on seeing Lyanna as soon as possible. "If you're not too weary, we can go to him now." Lyanna nodded, and the party proceeded inside, leaving the horses to stable hands. The corridors of Winterfell enveloped her in a flood of memories. She heard the echo of her own footsteps from years ago, chasing after her brothers. Servants bowed, greeting her as Your Grace, which felt both comforting and alien. Finally, they arrived at Lord Rhaegar's solar, the old man seated by a brazier for warmth. His hair was almost entirely white, his face lined with age. Yet his gray eyes still held a spark, flicking up when Lyanna entered. "My daughter," he rasped, lifting a trembling hand. Lyanna knelt beside him, clasping that hand gently. It felt thin, the bones fragile beneath the skin. "You've come. I feared I wouldn't see you again." She bit back tears. "I'm here, Father. I've missed you. I've missed Winterfell." He nodded, looking over her shoulder to see Rhaegar and Jon. "A Targaryen king in my halls. The world truly changed." His tone wasn't resentful, more a soft wonderment. "Rhaegar, you have my gratitude. You and my daughter, better for the realm than I once dared hope." Rhaegar stepped forward with quiet respect. "My lord, your daughter's courage shaped everything. I only followed where my heart and sense of duty led." Rhaegar's eyes then settled on Jon, who approached with a formal bow. "And this, your boy?" Lyanna gently touched Jon's shoulder. "Yes, father. Jon Targaryen, though Stark blood runs in his veins." Rhaegar gave a faint wheeze of a laugh. "A wolf among dragons or a dragon among wolves. A sign of the times." He beckoned Jon closer. "Let me look at you, lad." Jon knelt and Rhaegar placed a trembling hand on his cheek, nodding slowly. "You have the north in your eyes, even if your hair is dark like your mother's. Welcome home." They spent the next hour in conversation, warm furs draped around Rhaegar's shoulders. Ned joined them, occasionally filling in details about the North's affairs. Rhaegar listened thoughtfully, offering suggestions or asking clarifying questions. Lyanna felt a surge of pride at how seamlessly they all conversed, an accord forged after so much turmoil. In the days that followed, Winterfell bustled with the king's visit. Feasts were held, though subdued, to honor Lord Rhaegar's health. Northerners from various houses arrived, Umbers, Glovers, Mormonts, each paying homage to the crown but especially to Lyanna, the daughter of their region. Rhaegar took care to treat them as equals, mindful of northern pride. Jon found himself swarmed by curious onlookers, from young heirs to older warriors who remembered Brandon Stark. Ned guided them all with quiet authority, though he insisted that Lyanna must be the one to open the festivities. "The North sees you still as a Stark, my sister," he said. "They'll follow your lead." One afternoon, Lyanna took Jon riding beyond the walls, weaving through the forest trails she had known as a girl. A small guard accompanied them, but she waved them back so she could speak privately with her son. The canopy overhead was tinged with autumn gold, leaves drifting lazily. The crisp air smelled of pine and damp earth. Jon glanced about, awe shining in his eyes. "This is truly different from the south," he said. "The air, the quiet, everything feels older, deeper. As if the land itself can remember." Lyanna nodded. "The North has a long memory. Come, there's a place I want to show you." They rode down a winding trail until they reached a clearing near a wide stream. The water sparkled in the midday sun. A massive oak stood sentinel, its trunk gnarled. Lyanna dismounted, motioning Jon to follow. "This was where I used to come whenever I needed solitude. Or a moment away from my brother's teasing," she said with a soft smile. "I'd sit by the water and think. Or dream of riding away." Jon crouched by the stream, touching the cold water. "You yearn for freedom." She knelt beside him. "Yes, but the world has a way of calling us to duty. I learned that love and responsibility can be intertwined. I want you to know, if you ever find yourself at a crossroads, you can carry both the North spirit and the Targaryen legacy. They don't need to be at odds." He looked up. "Sometimes I feel I don't fully belong in either place. People see me as half-wolf, half-dragon. In the capital, I'm the son of the she-wolf queen. Here, I'm the boy with Targaryen blood. I'm never just me." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are Jon. Never forget that. Who you become isn't bound to the labels others give you. You can forge your own path. And you'll never walk it alone." A soft hush filled the clearing. The distant guard patrol kept out of earshot, allowing mother and son this fleeting privacy. Lyanna felt her heart swell with the fierce love she had carried since the day he was born. Through all the realm's turmoil, ensuring Jon could find a future free of the hatred that had once consumed the Seven Kingdoms had been her greatest wish. They returned to Winterfell as the sun dipped low, the sky turning a pale lavender. Ned was waiting in the courtyard. He beckoned Lyanna aside. His face was drawn, worry etched in every line. "Lya, father's taken a turn," he murmured. "The maester says he may not last the night." She drew a sharp breath, her mind flashing to the day she left Winterfell for King's Landing all those years ago. She had not imagined returning to watch her father slip away. She hurried to Lord Rhaegar's solar, finding him in bed, blankets piled high. Rhaegar stood respectfully at the side, having come immediately when Ned sent word. Maester Luwin hovered, worry furrowing his brow. Rhaegar's eyes flickered open when Lyanna entered. He managed a faint smile. "You're here," he rasped. "Good." She took his hand, kneeling by the bed. He struggled for breath, voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think we'd have so many years after that business with the Targaryens. But here we are. You've done well, my child. The realm stands. House Stark endures." Tears threatened her composure. "Father, we owe it to your strength. You raised us to be true Starks, no matter what world we found ourselves in." He turned his gaze to Rhaegar, who inclined his head. "You took care of her," Rhaegar murmured, each word a strained effort. "Did what you promised?" Rhaegar bowed his head. "My lord, I have tried. I will continue to honor your daughter's worth and the North's respect." A faint exhalation might have been approval. Rhaegar's eyelids fluttered. Maester Luwin stepped forward with a cup of milk of the poppy, but the old lord waved it away. Ned! Ned stepped to the bedside, swallowing hard. Rhaegar's gaze shifted between him and Lyanna. "You too, Brandon, we lost. But you remain. Carry the North." He said nothing more. A final breath rattled in his chest and the light faded from his eyes. Lyanna bowed her head, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Ned gently touched Rhaegar's face, closing his eyes. "Rest now, father," he said softly. That night, the direwolf banner flew at half-mast over Winterfell. Word spread swiftly that Lord Rhaegar Stark had passed, and a deep mourning settled over the castle. A funeral was prepared in the old northern tradition. His body would be laid to rest in the crypts, beside his ancestors. Ned stood as the new Lord of Winterfell, a solemn acceptance of the mantle he had always known would one day be his. Lyanna provided what comfort she could, feeling the ache of her own grief. Rhaegar offered condolences, reminding Ned that the crown would fully support the North in this transition. The next day, the funeral procession descended beneath Winterfell into the ancient crypts. Torches flickered against the stone walls, revealing the carved statues of kings in the north and old Stark lords, each with a direwolf at their feet. Ned led the way, flanked by Lyanna and Rhaegar, while Jon and other Stark bannermen followed in silence. Rhaegar's body, wrapped in a simple shroud, was carried on a bier. As they passed each statue, Lyanna felt the weight of centuries pressing on her chest. She recalled how she used to come here as a child on a dare, testing her courage among the silent stone watchers. At last, they reached the tomb prepared for Lord Rhaegar. Ned spoke the eulogy with quiet dignity, commending his father's lifelong service, lamenting the loss of Brandon, and acknowledging the realm's changes that Rhaegar had lived to see. When the stone slab was slid into place, the finality struck Lyanna. Tears slipped down her cheeks once more, her throat tight. Rhaegar rested a hand on her back in silent empathy. Jon bowed his head, lips set in a firm line. In the aftermath, Winterfell wore the hush of mourning. Lyanna spent time alone in her old chambers, those that had once been hers as a girl, though they had been refurbished for visiting ladies. Felt surreal. She found a trunk containing some of her childhood possessions, carefully preserved. A small wooden sword, a tattered cloak, even a ribbon she'd worn in her hair for a festival. She sat on the bed, turning the items in her hands, letting memories wash over her. Ned assumed his duties as Lord of Winterfell quietly, with minimal ceremony. The bannermen pledged their loyalty anew. House Manderly, House Serwyn, House Umber, and others. Lyanna noticed how many of them gazed upon her with respect and a certain awe. She was the Stark girl who had wed the Targaryen prince and become queen. She had returned for her father's final farewell. Now, with Ned as lord, the North felt another subtle shift. A new generation taking the helm. Days stretched into a week. Rhaegar and Lyanna considered returning south, but Ned urged them to stay a bit longer, to ensure the North felt secure in the crown's presence. The new Lord of Winterfell held a modest gathering in the Great Hall to mark his official assumption of lordship. Banners of the dire wolf and the three-headed dragon hung side by side. Mead and ale flowed, though the mood remained subdued in the wake of Rhaegar's passing. On one such evening, as the fire crackled in the great hearth, Rhaegar and Ned spoke quietly near the high table. Lyanna stood nearby, listening. Ned expressed concern about the wildlings who had grown bolder near the wall, skirmishing with the Night's Watch. Rhaegar frowned, acknowledging that the Watch had fewer recruits these days. They discussed the possibility of sending more supplies and men from the Crown to bolster Castle Black and the other forts. Jon drifted over, drawn by the conversation. Ned glanced at him, an idea sparking in his eyes. "Jon, have you ever considered visiting the Wall? It might do you good to see the edge of the kingdom, understand the Watch's task. If you're to help govern one day, you should know the North's boundaries firsthand." Jon looked thoughtful. "I'd be honored, Uncle. Yes, I'd like that. Perhaps soon." Rhaegar, overhearing, gave a measured nod. "A wise suggestion. We won't linger much longer, but you could ride ahead with a small escort, pay your respects to the Lord Commander. The realm seldom appreciates the Watch until winter truly comes." Lyanna watched Jon's face light with curiosity. She felt a protective pang, but also recognized the value in letting him see more of his mother's heritage. "Just be cautious," she admonished gently. "The wilds beyond the wall are harsh." Jon managed a smile. "I will, Mother." The next day, Ned arranged a small party to accompany Jon northward. Among them was Jory Castle, a trusted Stark guard, and a handful of rangers who knew the roads. They set out under a bright morning sun, promising to return within a week or two. Lyanna saw them off at the gates, hugging Jon briefly. The excitement in his eyes warmed her heart. Perhaps he needed this taste of the North's frontier to anchor his identity. After the departure, Rhaegar and Lyanna continued to support Ned in various tasks, listening to local disputes, discussing trade shipments that passed through the White Harbor port, and quietly reaffirming the crown's respect for northern traditions. Rhaegar's presence in Winterfell was a novelty. He walked through the Godwood daily, studying the heart tree with the carved face, its ancient eyes seeming to watch him. He sometimes asked Lyanna about the old gods, and she explained the quiet reverence that guided northerners. One evening, they received a raven from King's Landing. Tywin Lannister reported that the realm remained calm, though the Ironborn had shown more signs of restlessness, with a few contested raids on fishing ships near the Westerlands. Robert Baratheon had been called upon to mediate. Lyanna and Rhaegar exchanged worried looks. This was precisely the kind of news that suggested Balon Greyjoy might be testing boundaries. Yet Tywin assured them that no open rebellion had occurred. They decided to stay in Winterfell a little longer while instructing Tywin and Jon Arryn to maintain vigilance. Almost a fortnight after Jon's departure, he returned from the Wall. A light dusting of snow clung to his cloak as he rode into Winterfell's courtyard. Lyanna hurried out to greet him, flanked by Rhaegar and Ned. The young prince slid from his horse, face flushed from the cold, eyes shining. "Mother, father, uncle," he said, breath visible in the chilly air. "The wall is vast, more immense than I ever imagined. The Night's Watch is so diminished, but they hold fast. They took me atop the battlements, let me peer into the far north. It was like gazing into endless white." Ned gave a knowing nod. "A sight that reminds us how small we are." Jon exhaled, glancing at Rhaegar. The Lord Commander spoke of older threats, the White Walkers from legends. He said most of the Watch scoffs at such tales now, but some rangers claim they've seen strange things far beyond the Wall. I don't know what to believe." Rhaegar's expression grew pensive. "Legends endure for a reason. The realm's memory is long, though it often forgets the darkest chapters. But that's what the Watch is for, to guard against the unimaginable." Jon nodded slowly, as if turning this over in his mind. They also asked if the crown might send more resources. They're short on men, supplies, even warm clothing for the novices. Ned looked at Rhaegar. "We can arrange for that. I'll do my part from the north, and the crown can lend support as well." Rhaegar agreed immediately. "Yes, let's ensure the wall doesn't lack for basics. We might find volunteers among petty criminals or debtors who prefer the Watch to a prison cell." With that, the matter was settled. Over the next few days, Jon spoke often of the Wall, describing how it humbled him, how he felt a connection to the North's somber majesty. He reminded Lyanna of a younger Ned, observant, quietly determined, yet carrying the possibility of forging a new path. It made her proud, even if she worried about the burdens he might one day bear. At last, duty called them south once more. Rhaegar and Lyanna prepared to leave Winterfell. Ned stood at the gates, already settling into his role as Lord Stark, shouldering responsibilities with the stoic grace that defined him. He promised to write often, to keep them informed of the North's needs. Lyanna embraced him tightly, murmuring that she'd return whenever she could. The wagons rolled out, the horses trotting, and soon Winterfell's gray walls receded behind them. During the return journey, the roads felt lonelier. The crisp autumn air carried a hint of winter's first bite. Jon rode between his parents, occasionally asking Rhaegar about how he balanced the duties of a king with personal convictions. He wanted to know what shaped a just ruler. Rhaegar answered thoughtfully, emphasizing empathy and a willingness to listen, while also acknowledging that a king must stand firm when the realm demands it. They halted in the Riverlands for a few nights, accepting Lord Hoster Tully's hospitality at Riverrun. Catelyn Tully, Ned's betrothed in another life if Brandon had lived, was not present. She was with Ned at Winterfell, having come north for Ricard's funeral. But other Tullykin welcomed the king and queen warmly. The Red Fork's gentle flow was a marked contrast to the North's rugged grandeur. Lyanna found herself missing the northern air, but she set her resolve. Her place was in King's Landing, where 1,000 threads of loyalty and intrigue demanded constant weaving. When they finally crested the last hill and saw the capital in the distance, the sun was setting behind the city, gilding the spires with gold. They rode through the gates, greeted by the city's familiar clamor. Inside the Red Keep, news awaited them. Tywin Lannister and Jon Arryn had managed the realm in their absence. Many matters had gone smoothly, but certain rumors unsettled Lyanna, talk of Ironborn raids near Fair Isle, fresh from the gossip of traders. Though minimal in scale, such incidents stoked fear. Varys had also heard rumors that Balon Greyjoy was forging clandestine ties with certain sail groups in the Narrow Sea. Rhaegar's jaw tightened when he heard the report. "At least we are forewarned," he said gravely. "We won't let Balon catch us unprepared. I'll send a royal emissary to Pike requiring explanation for these alleged raids. If he denies involvement, we'll press for the names of those behind them." They reconvened the small council. Robert Baratheon, attending once more, snorted. "We should show these Ironborn no mercy. If they want war, let us bring war to their doorstep. Strike before they can unify." Rhaegar shook his head. "It's premature for a full invasion, Robert. We can't let old grudges overshadow reason. But we will not tolerate further provocations." Robert muttered something about how reason rarely worked with Krakens, but he did not push the matter further. Lyanna, ever watchful, guessed that Robert was spoiling for conflict, perhaps to feed that restless spirit of his. With his marriage to Cersei Lannister proving volatile, rumors abounded of their public shouting matches. He might be seeking the simpler certainties of the battlefield. A flurry of letters went back and forth. Pike offered tepid denials, claiming these raids were the work of rogue captains, not sanctioned by Lord Balon. He promised to punish any Ironborn who violated the king's peace. Rhaegar, cautious, sent more Royal Navy patrols to the western seas. Tension simmered, but open war did not break out. Meanwhile, daily governance continued. Lyanna immersed herself in the rhythms of the court, hearing petitions, advising the master of coin on fair taxation, championing certain edicts that protected small folk from abusive lords. Rhaegar divided his time between these affairs and tutoring Jon, Aegon, and Rhaenys in statesmanship. Elia Martell occasionally visited from Dorne, more comfortable with the arrangement that saw her children recognized at court without forcing her to reside permanently amid the southern intrigues. One day, a raven arrived from Lannisport carrying unexpected tidings. Cersei Lannister was with child Robert Baratheon's heir. The court buzzed, with some expressing hope that fatherhood might mellow Robert's temper. Others speculated about how a child of House Baratheon and House Lannister might shift the realm's power dynamics. Tywin Lannister, though outwardly calm, was said to be quietly exultant at the prospect of a royal grandson, well, not royal, but a scion with strong ties to the throne. If anything, the news made Robert more restive. He expressed uncertainty about fatherhood, confiding in Rhaegar over far too many cups of wine that he felt unprepared. Rhaegar listened sympathetically, offering what advice he could. Lyanna found it odd, imagining the robust, boisterous Robert as a father, but perhaps it would ground him in a sense of duty. Time would tell. Seasons slipped by, and that sense of cautious normalcy prevailed. The realm stayed at peace, with no major rebellions or invasions, though talk of petty conflicts never ceased. The tensions with the Iron Islands flared on and off, but nothing ignited a full war. Meanwhile, trade continued to improve in King's Landing. The city bustled, new construction spread outward, and the population slowly grew. Lyanna saw more and more travelers from Dorne, the Reach, even Essos, strolling the capital's markets. Life had never been so lively, some said. A generation was growing up that had never experienced the fires of the Mad King. Yet the crown weighed heavily on Rhaegar. Some evenings, he and Lyanna sat alone in their private solar, the windows open to let in a cool breeze off Blackwater Bay. Rhaegar would play a few soft chords on his silver harp, then stop, lost in thought. Lyanna would ease beside him, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling the subtle tension in his posture. "Do you remember," he said one night, voice distant, "when my only concern was prophecy and the songs of the Seven? I used to believe I was born for some grand destiny. Yet it seems my life's greatest labor has been tending a realm full of small crises, tax disputes, border raids, marriage politics." Lyanna's lips curved into a sympathetic smile. "And you've done it better than most kings in centuries. Peace is not a grand spectacle, it's the daily weaving of countless threads. You've kept them from tangling beyond repair." He sighed, setting the harp aside. "I see the children growing, forging their own paths. Aegon studies day and night, Rhaenys dances and composes poetry, Jon thrives in martial training and thoughtful reflection. They'll inherit what we've built. I worry about the next wave of storms. Balon Greyjoy, the uncertain threat beyond the wall, the ever-shifting alliances of the great houses." She turned, her dark hair brushing his cheek. "All we can do is prepare them. Show them unity is possible even after centuries of conflict. We broke the pattern once. They can do it again if needed." He reached up, tracing a hand along her hairline. "You've always been my courage, Lyanna. If not for you, I might have let prophecy dominate me or let my father's madness consume the realm. Instead, we found our own path." She cupped his cheek, letting their foreheads touch. "We did. And we'll keep forging it day by day." Time brought more changes. Cersei Lannister gave birth to a son whom Robert named Stefan after his father. Celebrations erupted in the Stormlands, and Tywin Lannister traveled there to lavish gifts and ensure his grandson's prominence. The child's hair was golden, a fact that raised no suspicion in a realm that often saw children favor one parent strongly, even though Baratheons were known for their dark hair. Robert boasted of fatherhood, though rumors persisted that his marriage was still rife with arguments. Meanwhile, Jon, Aegon, and Rhaenys matured into roles at court. At 19, Aegon began representing Rhaegar in minor negotiations, developing a reputation for fairness and articulate speech. Rhaenys performed in the Great Hall, playing the harp with a talent reminiscent of her father, mesmerizing audiences. Jon, turning 17, took on some commanding tasks in the training yard, occasionally leading drills with younger squires. He showed a knack for earning loyalty even from older knights who respected his quiet competence. Lyanna watched them with pride, acknowledging the swirl of speculation about their future marriages. No betrothals were yet announced, though talk abounded. Some rumored that Rhaenys might wed a son of House Martell, binding the Targaryen line closer to Dorne, while Aegon might form an alliance with the Tyrells or the Lannisters. As for Jon, the North frequently hinted at a match with one of Ned's wards or a daughter of House Manderly. One evening, Aegon privately broached the subject of a match with Margaery Tyrell. "She's quite charming, from what I hear, intelligent too," he admitted, cheeks coloring slightly. "I haven't met her yet, but her reputation is glowing. Would you be opposed if I visited Highgarden to meet her and see if there's any real connection?" Rhaegar and Lyanna exchanged a glance. Their own union had begun with a fateful meeting at a tourney. Perhaps letting Aegon see if affection could bloom was wise. "Not opposed at all," Lyanna replied. "The Tyrells are powerful, but it must also work for you personally. You're old enough to make the judgment. We won't force you." Aegon looked relieved, a small smile tugging his lips. "Thank you. Father, do you agree?" Rhaegar nodded. "Yes. Highgarden is a safe and hospitable place, and Mace Tyrell has always been polite. I'll send word that you intend a friendly visit. No obligations. Just courtesy." Aegon practically beamed at the thought. Plans were set for him to travel in the spring, accompanied by a small retinue including a Kingsguard knight for his protection. Lyanna felt a flutter of hope that he might find some measure of happiness in a match that could also aid the realm's unity. She recalled her own father cautioning against loveless, purely political marriages. She and Rhaegar had once been an improbable union that eventually saved thousands of lives. Why not let Aegon discover something similarly genuine? And so the tapestry continued to weave itself, each thread intersecting in new patterns. The realm was stable, yet never free of potential storms. Lyanna and Rhaegar found their greatest satisfaction in the quiet progress they made daily, heading off crises, guiding the children, strengthening alliances that had once been unimaginable. Their romance, once the subject of scandal, was now seen by many as a symbol of how even the starkest divides, fire and ice, could unite. Still, the ghosts of old conflicts occasionally murmured. Some nights, Lyanna lay awake, recalling the shape of Robert's heartbreak, the anguish of Elia Martell in the early years, or the volatile thread of Aerys' madness. She thought, too, of Brandon, her lost brother, whose death had nearly sparked a different rebellion in another timeline. She wished he could see the realm now flawed, but forging forward. There was a certain grace in knowing that even tragedy could yield a better tomorrow if the living chose to build it. Fate, however, does not rest long. As the realm navigated these calmer waters, new ripples emerged from distant shores. Merchants arriving in King's Landing brought tales of turmoil in Essos. One of the free cities was embroiled in a vicious trade war, generating an exodus of sell sails and brigands seeking plunder elsewhere. Varys' little birds whispered that some might find their way to the Stepstones again, or even strike deals with Balon Greyjoy for bold raids along the coasts. Such threats remained nebulous, but Rhaegar instructed the royal fleet to maintain readiness. Robert Baratheon volunteered to lead a swift punitive expedition if the sell sails tested Westerosi waters, his hammer thirsting for action. Rhaegar demurred, preferring not to inflame tensions prematurely. Yet the seeds were sown for future conflicts. Lyanna recognized the pattern. Peace, however precious, required constant vigilance. Spring arrived, and with it Aegon departed for Highgarden. The capital blossomed, flowers in the royal gardens, new produce in the markets. Lyanna, strolling the yard with Rhaegar, breathed in the sweet air, letting the momentary calm wash over her. They spoke of their son's journey, each hoping it would lead to a bright match. Rhaegar teased, "If Margaery Tyrell bewitches Aegon with her famed charms, we might soon hear wedding bells." Lyanna laughed softly, yet felt a mother's mixture of excitement and apprehension for her child's path. Jon spent more time in the training yard, forging friendships among knights who admired his dedication. Rhaenys pursued her musical skills, sometimes performing for visiting dignitaries. Elia Martell reappeared for a short stay, proud of her children's growth, exchanging affectionate remarks with Lyanna. If the early years had been fraught with tension between them, those days had long mellowed into a mutual respect that few could have foreseen. Then, a raven arrived from the west. Lord Tywin Lannister wrote that Ire-born raiders had struck near Banefort, burning a small harbor and fleeing before the local levy could respond. Tywin demanded a swift, crushing answer to these provocations. He wrote that no rogue captain excuse could suffice, Balon Greyjoy must control his lords or face reprisal. Robert Baratheon, hearing of it, roared that he should be sent at once to punish them. Tensions escalated as messages flew back and forth. Rhaegar convened the small council in a tense session. Tywin Lannister had dispatched a war fleet from Lannisport to patrol the western coast, prepared to retaliate if Balon's men appeared again. However, moving in force could provoke open conflict. Jon Arryn counseled caution, urging Rhaegar to demand Balon's compliance in punishing the raiders. Lyanna spoke up, pointing out that if Balon refused or feigned ignorance, the crown's authority would be undermined. They risked a slow slide into war. At length, Rhaegar decided to send an ultimatum to Balon Greyjoy: surrender the captains responsible for the Banefort attack and pay restitution to the victims or face the king's justice. A timeline was set: if Balon did not comply by midsummer, the crown would take stronger action. Robert pressed for an immediate assault, but Rhaegar held firm. "War is a last resort," he insisted. "I'll not plunge the realm into bloodshed if it can be averted." Robert stormed out, muttering that Targaryens had grown soft. Days passed, and tension gripped the court as they awaited Balon's reply. Meanwhile, news came that Aegon's stay in Highgarden had gone splendidly. Lord Mace Tyrell wrote effusive letters praising the prince's courtesy, while a private raven from Aegon told Rhaegar and Lyanna that Lady Margaery was every bit as clever and charming as rumored. He confessed a growing fondness, a spark of joy amid the looming threat. Finally, Balon's raven arrived. The parchment was terse, almost mocking in tone. Balon claimed the raiders were not under his direct command and refused to pay restitution. He offered to let the king send investigators if they wished to prove any link. His final line read, "The Ire-born answer to salt and iron, not to kneelers' demands." A challenge in all but name. The small council met in a grim atmosphere. Robert slammed his fist on the table. "This is open defiance. The realm has coddled him too long. Give me leave to rally forces from the Stormlands. We'll teach these Krakens the price of treachery." Jon Arryn, though typically calm, conceded that Balon's words were indeed provocative. Tywin Lannister had sent another letter, promising Lannister swords and ships if the crown declared war on the Iron Islands. Even some of the more moderate council members acknowledged the seriousness of Balon's affront. Lyanna looked at Rhaegar. She saw the regret in his eyes, the weight of a king forced toward a violent solution. "Have we no recourse short of war?" she asked quietly. "Could we blockade their ports, starve them into compliance?" Tywin answered, "That is war by another name, your grace. And it might prove costlier in the long run, giving Balon time to incite full rebellion." Rhaegar steepled his fingers, silent a long moment. "Gather the crown's fleets. Alert the lords of the Westerlands to prepare. Summon the Stormlands, the reach any who can muster ships. We will not strike blindly, but if Balon persists in these raids, we will answer in force. Let him see that the realm's patience has limits." Robert's face lit with grim approval. Lyanna felt a pang, remembering the vow she and Rhaegar had made to avoid bathing Westeros in fire and blood. Yet if Balon Greyjoy insisted on defiance, the kingdom could not stand idle. War drums sounded in the distance, a thunderous echo from the day Rhaegar had deposed his father. They had once staved off a realm-wide conflict. Now, ironically, it was the Targaryen monarchy threatened by a rebellious lord. Preparations accelerated over the coming weeks. Ships in Blackwater Bay were readied, their hulls inspected, sails refitted. Knights and foot soldiers gathered in King's Landing, forming a royal host. Ravens flew across the land, calling banners to muster at Lannisport and the harbors of the Reach. Robert took charge of the Stormland levies, coordinating with old friends who hungered for the glory of battle. In the midst of it all, Rhaegar walked the corridors with haunted eyes, torn between the need to protect the realm and the sorrow of resorting to violence. Lyanna supported him, holding strategic discussions, ensuring logistics were in place. Yet she could not shake the dread that war brought ruin even in victory. By midsummer, word arrived that Balon Greyjoy had not complied with any demands. Instead, sporadic raids continued along the western coast, sometimes repelled by local forces, sometimes successful enough to sow fear. Robert howled that each day of inaction emboldened the Krakens. Tywin Lannister insisted that an expeditionary force should set sail soon. Rhaegar, though reluctant, saw no further avenue for peace. With a heavy heart, he summoned the council and declared that Balon Greyjoy was in open rebellion. The realm would act to restore order. That same evening, Lyanna stood with Rhaegar on a balcony overlooking the Red Keep. Torches below glimmered like stars, and the Blackwater rush reflected a waning moon. In the distance, they heard the calls of sailors loading the royal galleys, the clang of armor from men preparing for the campaign. Rhaegar sighed, placing an arm around her shoulders. "All our efforts to keep the peace," he murmured, "and we find ourselves at the brink of war." She pressed closer, recalling the hush of the godswood at Harrenhal, the day they exchanged vows and changed the fate of Westeros. "Sometimes war finds us, no matter what we do. We can only wage it in a way that spares as many lives as possible and end it swiftly." He nodded, eyes shadowed by regret. "Swift justice, then. The Ironborn must not drag the entire realm into chaos." Below, the city carried on as if nothing had changed, but the next few days saw thousands of men marching toward the docks. Robert Baratheon left first, commanding a formidable host to rendezvous with Lannister forces near Case. The plan was for the combined armies to strike key strongholds once the royal fleet blockaded Pike and the main Isles. Rhaegar would lead the naval front with a contingent from King's Landing, allied with ships from the Reach. In that final swirl of preparations, Lyanna faced a decision: remain in the capital or accompany Rhaegar on the campaign. She approached him in their chamber, where he was fastening the last straps of his armor, a half-plate design that still allowed movement, black with subtle red trim. His silver hair was bound back for practicality. He turned at her approach. "You want to come?" he said quietly, as though reading her mind. She nodded. "I won't be parted from you while you face peril. I can aid you, whether in strategy or simply morale. The realm knows me as the wolf who stood by your side. Let me continue to do so." He touched her cheek, hesitation in his eyes. "I fear for your safety. The Ironborn are ruthless. Yet I recall the day you insisted on joining me at Pike the first time we visited. You are no timid queen, and the men will see your presence as a sign of unity." A slight smile graced her lips. "I learned from the north that in times of danger, Starks do not hide behind walls. We stand with our pack." He exhaled and gave a firm nod. "Very well. We sail together." Lyanna donned her own simpler armor, boiled leather reinforced with steel bits for the torso. She strapped on a sword she had sparingly used, a slender blade suitable for her frame. She was no knight, but she was no stranger to self-defense. The day they boarded the royal flagship, the city turned out to watch. Soldiers in Targaryen livery thronged the docks, supply wagons rattling over cobblestones. Lyanna caught glimpses of Jon, Aegon, and Rhaenys standing on a high terrace, gazing down. Elia Martell stood beside them, concern etched on her face. Jon called out, "Mother, father, bring victory home." She forced a reassuring wave in return, though her stomach churned. The anchor was weighed, sails unfurled, and the ships glided into Blackwater Bay. Rhaegar stood at the prow, gaze resolute. Drums beat a low rhythm. War had come for them, not the realm-wide slaughter once feared under Aerys' tyranny, but a war nonetheless. Lyanna steeled herself, determined to minimize the damage. They made for the western coast, a journey of several days. A portion of the fleet split off to secure certain coastal points, while Rhaegar led the main body, heading for the Iron Islands themselves. Along the way, they linked up with ships from Highgarden. So many sails dotted the horizon that it looked like a floating city. The wind carried the scent of salt, the tang of coming conflict. At last, they reached the Iron Islands. Balon Greyjoy had mustered his own fleet in defiance, black sails bearing the Kraken. A sea battle brewed near Great Wyke, the largest of the isles. The waves heaved under a cloudy sky. Lyanna stood on the royal flagship's deck, the deckhands tense, archers at the ready. Rhaegar conferred with captains, planning how to smash the Ironborn line without exposing the crown's ships to encirclement. Then, with a cacophony of horns, the clash began. Ironborn longships charged, swift and deadly, eager to close distance and board. The crown's galleys fired arrows and ballista bolts, while smaller vessels darted around. To flank, Lyanna braced herself. sword at her side. She glimpsed the chaos. Men shouting, sails torn, the water churning with debris. The reek of burning pitch stung her nose as flaming arrows lit one ironborn ship ablaze. Rhaegar directed the flagship with calm authority, trusting his admirals for maneuvers while he focused on seeing the broader picture. Though not a sea commander by tradition, he had studied enough to hold his own. A flurry of grappling hooks latched onto the starboard side as an ironborn raider tried to board. Lyanna watched as crown soldiers rushed to repel them, swords flashing. She caught sight of an ironborn warrior leaping over the rail, axe raised, only to be struck down by a spearman. She felt a surge of old battle adrenaline. Her heart pounded as she shifted position, making sure no attacker slipped behind Rhaegar. Another grappling hook thumped onto the deck near her, and a burly ironborn in salt-stained leather scrambled up the rope. Lyanna, gripping her sword, stepped forward to intercept. The man swung a crude blade. She parried, stepping sideways, remembering her training. He came at her again with a growl. She dodged, hooking her sword under his guard and slicing across his forearm. He bellowed, dropping his blade. A crown guard finished him with a thrust to the chest. Lyanna's heart hammered. She had drawn blood, ending or at least facilitating an end to a life. She clenched her jaw, pushing back nausea. War was not a game. It was an agony. Throughout the chaos, the crown's numerical advantage told. The Ironborn had skill and ferocity, but they were outmatched. One by one, their ships were disabled, captured, or forced to retreat. Fire and water mingled as half-burnt vessels sank. Survivors clung to wreckage. By day's end, the battered remnants of Balon's fleet fled back to the Rocky Isles, the crown's war horns sounding triumph. Rhaegar, breathing hard, surveyed the horizon from the flagship's prow. Lyanna leaned on the railing, trembling from the aftermath of combat. "We've broken their naval strength," Rhaegar said, voice thick with both relief and sorrow. "Now we must land troops to take Pike. We end this rebellion at its root." She nodded, glancing around at the wounded men, the flames guttering on the water's surface. So many had died already. She prayed the next stage would be swift. The Allied forces landed on Great White and Pike's shore over the ensuing days, establishing beachheads. Robert Baratheon's host, combined with the Lannister contingent, took the lead in ground assaults. Castle after castle fell. Many Ironborn cast down their arms rather than face the combined might of the realm. Reports poured in of Robert's triumphs. It was said he personally battered down a keep gate with his warhammer. The final stand took shape at Pike, where Balon Greyjoy barricaded himself with loyal men. Rhaegar arrived by sea, surrounding the fortress. The realm's banners snapped in the wind outside Pike's battered walls. A short siege ensued. Balon refused to surrender. The crown's forces battered at Pike's main gate with siege engines, the thunder of impacts echoing off the stony pillars. Rhaegar, though cautious of a costly assault, pressed forward, unwilling to let the rebellion fester. Robert Baratheon commanded the vanguard, lusting for victory. Lyanna remained near Rhaegar, both as moral support and to oversee matters with a calm head. Eventually, a breach was made in the outer wall. Soldiers poured in, clashing with Ironborn defenders in grim hallway battles. Balon's men fought savagely, but they were outnumbered and exhausted. Step by bloody step, the crown's forces advanced. Lyanna glimpsed Robert in the courtyard, hammer swinging, shouting for Balon to face him. She saw Lannister archers on the parapets, picking off Ironborn who tried to flee across rope bridges. The air stank of sweat, blood, and sea salt. At last, cornered in his own great hall, Balon Greyjoy, battered and furious, faced the reality of defeat. Surrounded by a ring of heavily armed knights, he stood with his remaining sons Roderick and Meryn alongside a handful of loyal men. Rhaegar pushed through the crowd, flanked by Robert and Tywin. Lyanna came behind. The hall's walls dripped with condensation. Torches sputtered in the damp wind gusting through a shattered window. Balon glared defiantly. "So you come in force to crush the Ironborn spirit." Rhaegar, sword in hand, stared back. "You forced this with raids and refusal. You scorned the realm's authority. Now your people pay the price." Balon spat on the floor. "We bend to no man." Robert snorted. "Then die on your feet," he growled, stepping forward, hammer raised. Before Robert could close in, Rhaegar lifted a hand. He turned to Balan, voice resonating with command. I'll offer you one last chance. Submit. Kneel before the Iron Throne, surrender your crown of salt and rock, pledge your life as forfeit if ever you rebel again. Spare your sons. Spare your people more death. Lyanna watched Balan's face contort. Rage warred with self-preservation. Roderick and Meryn exchanged tense glances, both were wounded, battered. Finally, Balan gave a ragged nod. He fell to his knees, dropping his sword with a clang. His sons followed suit. We yield, Balan rasped. The Iron Islands yield. A hush fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the men present. Robert lowered his hammer grudgingly. Tywin Lannister watched with cold satisfaction. Soldiers let out cautious sighs. Rhaegar's stance remained rigid as though every muscle was coiled. Then it ends, he declared. The rebellion was crushed. Balan was stripped of his titles as King of the Iron Islands. He would remain Lord Greyjoy, but under heavy restrictions. His ships would be limited, his sons sent as wards or hostages to ensure future loyalty. Some demanded Balan's execution, but Rhaegar refused. Too many have died, he said. Let him live so his people remember the cost of defiance. Robert called it too lenient, but grudgingly accepted. In the aftermath, the battered fortress of Pike was left to smolder. The combined armies disbanded, returning to their respective lands. The Crown's ships hauled away captured Ironborn vessels or scuttled them. Rhaegar stood on the rocky beach, staring out at the gray horizon. Lyanna, exhausted, joined him, the wind tangling her hair. We ended it, she murmured, voice hollow. He nodded, eyes distant. At a price. So many lives lost. But Westeros remains whole. She slid an arm around his waist, feeling the tension in his body. We did what we had to. Now the Isles are firmly bound to the Crown. May the next generation find a better path. Rhaegar turned, pressing his forehead to hers. Sea spray speckled them both. I wanted to spare the realm more war. Yet war came. Let this be the last for a long time if the gods are good. They departed the Iron Islands with a sense of grim resolution. Their ships carried them back to King's Landing, where the city erupted in cheers for victory. Jon, Aegon, and Rhaenys embraced them on the docks, relief evident in their faces. Robert Baratheon reveled in the acclaim for his battlefield prowess, though his marriage troubles remained. Tywin Lannister accepted praise with quiet complacency. In the Red Keep, Rhaegar and Lyanna removed their armor, letting palace servants tend to bruises and small cuts. The battlefield's roar had subsided to the hush of corridors. That night, in their private chambers, they lay awake, entwined, speaking in low voices about the cost of this campaign. Lyanna confessed her horror at seeing the bloodshed, how each life weighed on her. Rhaegar admitted his sorrow that, despite all their efforts, they could not avoid the necessity of force. Yet the realm was safe once more. Balan Greyjoy's threat had been quelled. The monarchy emerged strengthened, for it had shown it would not tolerate rebellion. In the days that followed, Lyanna resumed her public duties, meeting with small folk, ensuring compensation for those whose taxes had funded the war, overseeing the reintegration of the Iron Islands under new regulations. She noticed how some courtiers looked at her with awe. Stories had spread of the queen who had fought alongside the king, parrying Ironborn blades on the flagship's deck. She took no pride in those tales, only gratitude that she stood alive, able to shape the aftermath. A final measure was decided. Balan's youngest son, Theon, a mere boy of 10, would be sent to Winterfell as a ward of House Stark, effectively a hostage to ensure Greyjoy loyalty. Rhaegar believed Ned would raise the boy firmly but fairly. Lyanna was uneasy about separating a child from his home, but she understood the tradition. Theon's presence in the north would remind Balan daily of the price of rebellion. Summer began to wane. Robert Baratheon returned to the Stormlands, taking his battered but triumphant forces with him. Tywin Lannister rode west in a flourish. The capital slowly settled into a post-war routine. A dark undercurrent of weariness crept in. Everyone knew they had avoided a broader conflict, yet the cost in blood and heartbreak was real. Lyanna saw orphans, widows, and wounded men begging in the streets. She directed extra resources for their aid, refusing to let the war's victims be forgotten. Rhaegar, in the throne room, pronounced new decrees ensuring the crown's legal authority over the Iron Islands, distributing seized wealth to rebuild harbors that had suffered raids. The lords of Westeros witnessed a monarchy that could fight as fiercely as any Targaryen of old but would not become a tyrant in victory. Life once again resumed its winding course. But Lyanna felt changed. She had seen war up close, beyond the realm's fleeting illusions of peace. She realized anew how precious that peace was and how fragile. One evening, as the red sun dipped low over the city walls, she found Rhaegar in the godwood the court had planted, a small cluster of weirwoods and oaks behind the red keep. The sapling heart tree had grown taller, though it was still slender. He stood before it, silent as if in prayer. She approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You come here more often now," she said softly. He nodded, eyes on the face carved into the weirwood's pale trunk. "I think of the old gods, your gods, in a sense, and wonder if they watch me. If they judge how I wield power. I never used to care for such things, but war changes a man." She leaned her head against his arm. "They judge all of us, perhaps, but you've ruled with compassion and resolve. Even this war ended quickly, with minimal ravaging. That's something." He turned toward her, a faint smile on his lips. "You're my anchor, Lyanna. Fire and ice, wolf and dragon. We've bridged so many divides. Even if the realm sees more storms, I believe we can weather them." She nodded, letting her cheek rest against his chest. Around them, the trees rustled in a faint wind as if murmuring agreement. The hush of the small godwood felt like a refuge from the world's clamor. "We will," she whispered. "We must." In the distance, the city's lights began to glimmer as dusk embraced King's Landing. From the harbor, a ship's horn gave a low call. Far above, a scattering of stars flickered into view. They stood together, drawing quiet strength from each other. If more wars loomed, they would face them. If more alliances were needed, they would forge them. The Seven Kingdoms were not a perfect tapestry, but every patch of peace, every union that transcended old hatreds was a victory of its own. And so the Dragon King and the Wolf Queen persevered. Their bond, born in secrecy and crowned in defiance, had shepherded Westeros from the madness of Ares to the challenge of Balon Greyjoy's rebellion. Though swords would still clash, though hearts would still ache, they had proven that love and determination could remake a realm, turning potential catastrophe into enduring resilience. In the quiet that followed, as the night deepened, they silently renewed their vow to guard what they had built and guide their children, Aegon, Rhaenys, Jon, toward a future where war was no longer the realm's inheritance, but only a temporary shadow on the path to a more lasting peace.